So welcome to the Monday, July 27th meeting of the Select Committee on Blockchain, FinTech, and Digital Innovation. If you were out there hanging out, waiting for us to start at 8 a.m., we apologize. We had some technical difficulties, which delayed us from getting started, but now here we are. Today, we were hopeful that we would be meeting in the beautiful land of Mike Yin, which is also known, Representative Mike Yin, which is also known as Jackson. But unfortunately, we're unable to meet because of the pandemic. So here we are trying out Zoom one more time and hopeful that one day we'll be able to all meet together and do the state's business. Mr. Co-Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, do you have any remarks before we get started?
Welcome everyone. We've got a good agenda today. Hopefully we can get through it fairly quickly. I know a couple of our members have some meetings that they have to attend to, so they'll be popping on and off. Briefly, I'll remind for protocol purposes, those that will provide public testimony, a couple of important things. First of all, you'll be watching this on Zoom. Before you come in, please turn off on YouTube. Before you come in, please turn off the YouTube prior to joining us on Zoom, because there will be a lag in the timing, which creates some awkward circumstances. So hopefully we won't have that. And we'll try and keep our comments concise today because we do have a lot to get through, important issues. And I think we've all made some pretty good progress on these topics. And then we'll have some updates a little bit later on some events that have been taking place recently. But with that, Mr. Chairman, the floor is yours.
Excellent. Thank you, Co-Chairman. So with that, let's just roll right into our first topic. We have autonomous vehicles. And Kelly and David, who do we have over in our waiting room? We're going to start, I guess we're actually going to start with LSO comments. So let's go ahead and start there before we bring in, looks like YDOT maybe. Let's see who we'll move to next after that. So I'm not sure who's presenting, Kelly or David or both, but we have an overview of autonomous vehicles. Go ahead.
And Mr. Chairman, did you want to do a roll call before we got started?
Very good.
We should do that.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Senator Dockstader.
Here.
Senator Driscoll.
Excused.
Senator Nethercott.
Here.
Representative Greer.
Yeah, here.
Representative Lindholm.
Here.
Representative Yin.
Here.
Mr. Kaufman.
Here.
Ms. Long.
Here.
Mr. Revel should be joining shortly.
Yep, excused. He's joining
Okay.
soon.
Co-Chairman Rothfuss
Here.
and Co-Chairman Olson.
Here.
And
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, one more thing before we get started. Let's make sure that committee members mute their sound when not speaking. And remember, if we're doing any votes, we'll be typically voting by hand raise.
Thank you. I forget about to introduce all the rules, so I feel like I'm on a Zoom legislative meeting every other day anymore. So seems like now that we can meet by Zoom, we meet more. Okay, with that, autonomous vehicles, Kelly, David, take it away.
Mr. Chairman, this is just a very brief overview of the fact sheet that I provided to the committee, which gives an overview on federal, congressional, and state actions related to autonomous vehicles. So currently, 30 states and DC have enacted legislation related to autonomous vehicles. 11 states have executive orders. 5 states have legislation and executive orders, and 9 states, including Wyoming, have neither legislation nor executive orders. Generally, state statutes address standard terms such as autonomous vehicles, automated driving systems, vehicle platooning. They also implement pilot projects on state roads and highways, create task forces and commissions to study autonomous vehicles, establish requirements for titling vehicles, autonomous vehicles, registration and insurance requirements, and specify driver's license requirements for operating autonomous vehicles. Generally, executive orders have created pilot projects or task forces and commissions to study autonomous vehicle technology. In 2016, the Department of Transportation and the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration issued the Federal Automated Vehicles Policy to create a safe approach to developing highly automated vehicle technology, which was then updated in 2017, 2018, and 2020. Congress has introduced legislation, but has not yet passed comprehensive legislation related to autonomous vehicle. That is a very brief overview, like I said, of the fact sheet that I provided to the committee members.
Thank you, Ms. Shep. And so for the committee members who you'll find, I think it's 2-04 in your binder, just in case you haven't had a chance to look at it. Kelly put together a really great memorandum that has some exhibits to a lot of what she mentioned. And you can go through, and we'll certainly be, as we move through this will be something that you can refer back to, but just wanted to make sure everyone's aware of that, the great work that Kelly did there. Okay, any questions for Ms. Shep? Oh, Representative Lindholm.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Shep, in regards to other committees and their activities, were you able to coordinate with the travel committee as far as what they're looking at in this regard?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Lindholm, I did not.
Co-Chairman Rothfuss, I'm sure you got a response to that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Lindholm, if you meant the Transportation Committee instead of the Travel Committee, then yes, Senator Von Flatern should be joining us, hopefully, and we should bring him in the near future if he's out there. We should let Senator Driscoll's out there too. I'm bringing him.
Yeah, I'm admitting Senator Driscoll now.
But let's make sure that I'll send a quick note to Senator Von Flatern saying that we're on this topic, and so he and I did spend some time chatting, and he participated in some little working group activities to make sure that we're doing a decent job of coordinating, and hopefully we'll work well with their efforts that they have begun. But I think he's happy to see us participating and working with him. So. It's a good point. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Senator Rothfuss, and welcome Vice President Senator Driscoll. Glad you're here.
You're sorry I'm late. My calendar invite had 8:30 on it. I opened an email and found out different. Thank you.
Senator, we actually just barely got rolling. We had some technical difficulties, so you're perfectly fine.
Lucky day. Thank you.
All right. Any other questions for Ms. Shep? No. All right. We'll keep an eye out for Senator Von Flatern, and we'll move into Department of Transportation. Looks like.
Chairman Olson?
Oh, yeah, Senator Maddox.
It is Senator Von Flatern, like Bobby Flay. Flatern.
Flay.
He's slicing and dicing and flaying.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm sure he would too. Okay, so I'm thinking I see, sometimes it's hard to pick out who's who on here because but I think I see Reiner here. Aha. Welcome, Director Reiner. I'm trying to see if we have anybody else from YDOT that we need to let in. But I think I see Reiner here.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, good morning. I think Mr. Babbitt may be out there.
Welcome, Director Reiner. I'm trying to see if we have anybody else from one of the two of you who we just let in has your YouTube stream on the background if you want to mute that. Is Troy possibly on his phone, General? Because I see a phone number I don't recognize.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure. I think we can get started with myself and Mr. Kirchmeier.
Okay, well, let's do that. I'm hesitant to let in this random phone number. I don't know, Kelly and David, if you want to send a message out or figure out who this phone number is, that'd be great while we move along. Go ahead, General.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee, certainly a pleasure to be with you here today. Just in terms of mechanics, you should have a PowerPoint brief. Mr. Chairman, we can show it, we can share the screen, or we can just talk through it slide by slide, pending your choice.
General, let's go ahead and share the screen. That's helpful for everyone, I think, out there.
All right, thank you.
Sir, this is Mr. Chairman, this is Mr. Kirkmeyer. I'll need the host I'll need you to enable screen sharing so I can bring the slide set up for you.
Mr. Chairman, I just did.
Looks like we got you, I hope. Try it now.
Chairman, thank you. Mr. Chairman, can you see the screen?
Not yet. There you go. Now we got it.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director,
Yeah, please
if you want to
proceed.
continue.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So maybe if we slip over to the next slide, please, just for, the agenda. Mr. Chairman, really what we'd like to do today is just update you on what the Department of Transportation is doing. Certainly, we took this as an interim topic for us this year, and really saw it key for us to educate ourselves on what's out there in terms of autonomous vehicles and really establish the framework for going ahead. Certainly science and the economics of the AV are rapidly taking us down that road. So you can see the agenda. That's what we'd like to talk to you about today. Next slide, please. As we thought through this, there's our problem statement. Really, we thought it was very key that we take a look at how we safely manage the integration of autonomous vehicles into our system. And we see the end state as the correct legal authorities, the correct safety procedures, and the correct highway infrastructure to ensure, the integration of autonomous vehicles onto our system. Next slide, please. And so our goal for the year was really to create the conditions to ensure that we can safely and effectively integrate the AV autonomous vehicles into our transportation system. And what we have done, Mr. Chairman, is with this goal in mind is stood up a fairly robust working group to take a look at the multiple facets that are involved in this system. And the lead for our work group is Mr. Jesse Kirkmeyer, who's presenting. And Mr. Chairman, unless you have any really questions for me at this point, what I'd like to do is turn the brief over to Mr. Kirkmeyer and let him walk you through the details.
Yeah, thank you, General. That sounds great. Mr. Kirkmeyer, you want to take the wheel?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to everyone on the committee. As the director said, we have established a working group. Here's a listing of the folks currently external to YDOT. Pretty much anyone in YDOT who's a subject matter expert or has something to do with safety and integration of AVs is also included on the committee or on the working group, but I didn't want to list those names. I will highlight that we do have members from the autonomous vehicle, Miss Celebreze from Cruise, and then as of last Friday, we added another autonomous vehicle company from Easy, a representative from Easy Mile. And then I think Mr. Wolf is actually presenting after us, and he's also agreed to be part of the working group. Really what we did is we organized ourselves. We held our first meeting last February and just tried to get our arms around the scope of the issues that we had to address. We meet with the main working group every other month for about 2 hours. The last meeting, we had a presentation from the insurance industry talking about the importance of how we adapt policies for insurance. As we meet in these monthly or every other monthly meetings, what we're trying to do is get everyone on the working group to the same level of knowledge and understanding of what autonomous vehicles are and what we have to do in our state to address the issues to safely integrate them into the state's transportation structure. In order to break it down into smaller parts, we have organized 4 sub-working groups, and you can see them there. And they focus really on individual areas to study. They meet separately on the off months, and then they present what they've determined or discovered to the main working group during the main working group months. Typically, the sub-working groups are led by a YDOT person. We've broken our program out into 3 phases. Phase 1 is what is the phase we're in right now. It's education and research. We don't know how long this will take us, but eventually we'll transfer into recommendation and budget because we see that we probably will have to include in it some sort of procedural recommendation changes within the department and perhaps some budgeting. And then eventually we're going to go into implementation once we've established the program and transfer it to whatever entity within the department itself or what other entity is created to continue the management of autonomous vehicles. We don't know what that looks like now. It might just be a program within one of the current administrative departments in the agency, or it might be something completely different. So you can see what we're working on in phase 1. And again, as I previously stated, we're just trying to get all of the group members to the same level of understanding about the scope of the problem, and then also to help us define the problem or the issues and challenges that we might have to face. Phase 2, recommendation and budget. And as after this slide, I'll present kind of a notional timeline slide. And what we don't see is a specific end to a phase and then a beginning to a next one. They're probably going to overlap. As we learn and as different states experience different issues with their programs, we will also probably learn from that, and we might have to go back and reassess and determine if policies and procedures are working correctly. Same with any kind of budgeting that we might have to do within a department. As things change, that might also change. And then as we try to implement and bring these companies and their products safely onto our road systems, we will learn from that and we'll have to adjust. So here's a notional timeline. And as you can see, the phasing structure, the lower left corner is the now as we're talking to you about this. And as
Mr.
we
Chairman,
go.
One moment, sorry. I see Representative Lindholm has a question.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead, Representative Lindholm.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so my question has to do with specifically the working group established by the Department of Transportation in this regard, and also what their current objectives are. And they just talked about starting to bring in on their timeline, bring in these types of companies. And wouldn't it, I guess, correct me if I'm wrong, but wouldn't it be helpful to have some of these companies participating in your working group before you develop any kind of recommendations for the legislature? Because let's be honest, you're not, and I'm not, nobody here is experts in regards to autonomous vehicles. So if we're going to develop a strategy for that, wouldn't that be, or I guess maybe I'm misunderstanding. Can you help me out, please?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Lindholm, you basically described the process that we are currently in. We do have autonomous vehicle company membership on the working group. We just added them within the last month. We had difficulty getting some on board initially. We had some folks on and they dropped off, but we got them on board this last month. You are correct. The August meeting is really set aside for them to brief us on the challenges and issues that they've seen as they try to implement and integrate their products into other road systems in other states. And that is exactly right. We have to look at this both from procedural aspect within YDOT itself, and then from a legislative aspect. And then at that point, that's where the director will take over, and he will have those conversations that decides on the legislative stuff. Procedurally, we'll work that internally, but absolutely, sir, we have not determined any objectives yet because we're still in that learning phase. And what we expect to have after the legal company or the legal working group continues their meetings and we do our assessment, we expect to have a pretty good analysis and probably some recommendations as we move toward possibly addressing the JTC at their meeting in September. But you're completely right. We are including those AV companies in this working group, and we are hopeful that they will help us figure this out.
Follow up, Representative Lindholm.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you state who those companies are, please? If possible.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Representative Lindholm. Currently, it's Cruise, which is GM's subsidiary, and Easy Mile, which is a autonomous vehicle company in Denver. And then, as I stated previously, Mr. Wolf, who's addressing this select committee after us, I believe, on the agenda, and he represents the Self-Driving Coalition. And we are continuing to research. We think it's important to get probably a freight company or two involved. And I do continue to reach out and try to get other autonomous vehicle companies included in the working group.
Thank you. Mr. Kirkmeyer, continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So breaking down what the working groups, the sub-working groups are looking at specifically, here's what the legal group is reviewing and assessing and conducting an analysis on. And really it's about the legal framework, and from the direction that Director Reiner has given me, what we want to do is ensure that Wyoming provides and facilitates autonomous vehicle companies operating on our roads, but does that in a safe and efficient and effective manner. The vehicle working group is really on that part or that side where we try to get the vehicles on registered correctly, licensed correctly, everything else that might be necessary either for testing or for vehicles that have already been tested for operations on Wyoming's roadways. The third is the infrastructure and technology. Initially, we had this separated in two separate working groups. The first one was just focused on an assessment of the infrastructure, the roadway systems, signage, everything else like that. And then the technology part was really what's on the vehicle side. But as we did the initial assessment, the two SMEs running those two separate groups decided that they were so integrated that we should just combine those two working groups into a single group. And this really looks at the technology involved with operating the vehicles on the highways and on the roads, both from the infrastructure side and the vehicle technology side. And then finally, safety and training. And if you remember when I showed the earlier slide, this is really this group is led by our highway patrol, and they're looking at the safe operation training, emergency vehicle or emergency responder training, anything else that has to do with the safety and ensuring that the integration of the vehicles on the roadway meets the public's expectations of safety and operation. Mr. Chairman, that's all I have right now. Pending any questions, I'll turn it back over to Director Reiner.
Thank you, Mr. Kirkmeyer. Questions, committee? Co-Chairman Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Kirkmeyer, I'm curious about the time frame. I know that you had a slide that had a couple of dates on it, and then sort of the other ones were TBD. And when we look around the country, 31 states, or I guess 41 states already have some type of policy in place, whether that's an executive order enacted legislation or both. Most states already have enacted legislation that enables this at some level or another. And I'm curious why we're basically in phase one of a 3-phase process to get to the point where we do something, and almost every other state in the country has already kind of, at least in my view, seems to have reached that phase 3. So what's our timeline, and kind of what's our aspiration here? Are we just are we satisfied with just trying to follow in the footsteps of what other states have done, or are we trying to lead here?
Yep.
General, who wants
Yeah,
that
this-
question? General Reiner?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Co-Chairman, that's a fair question. I'll tell you, we have certainly stood this up, this work group up, and with the goal of moving as fast as we need to, pending really legislative guidance. So it is relevant that Senator Von Flateren is on the team, and I think really relying between him and the Joint Transportation Committee, and obviously the interest of this committee, I think that should lead us in the timeline that is required. It is my sense is we're going to need to do something sooner than later. There is increasing interest, and just last week, in fact, started to hear rumors about Yellowstone sort of actively pursuing, and there being some interest in some autonomous vehicles in that area. So you pose a good question, and I think we'll need to accelerate this timeline as we go down the road.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
General, do you have a sense of, I mean, are there things that we can accomplish along the way through legislation that enable this? For example, testing and some recognition of liability. Do we need to do those types of things in a stepwise fashion?
Mr. Chairman and Senator Rothfuss, there's a lot of push initially for this testing legislation, and it seems like there is some of that in the country. It seems like the states, testing companies are testing in their home turf, and really we have not really been approached officially by somebody wanting to test. I think there would be some prudence to having the ability, if somebody wants to drive us on our roads, to have that legal ability as soon as we can.
One more question, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, please.
And General, do you feel that we currently have sufficient rules and regulations, sufficient statute in place for the what are effectively the existing semi-autonomous vehicles, those vehicles that are capable of autonomous driving at this point in time? They're obviously not the driverless vehicles that are sort of the aspiration point, but are we equipped for what's currently on the road?
Mr. Chairman and Senator Rothfuss, let me ask if Mr. Kirkmeyer can answer or help me with that one, because as they've been working through the legal sides, I want to make sure I'm accurate in our answer on that.
Sure. Thank you, General.
Mr. Kirkmeyer?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, what I would say is we're probably, and again, I am not the SME, we're probably okay with the level 3 autonomous vehicles, but to get to level 4 and level 5, where you're talking about a vehicle that can really do everything itself, I don't think, based upon the initial assessment by the legal sub-working group that we, and our safety sub-working group from the patrol, we are at the point where we have the appropriate procedures in place to fully safely integrate those types of vehicles. And that's really what we're looking toward right now, is as doing that assessment and getting something in front of the JTC at their September meeting to be able to appropriately handle any level 4, level 5 type vehicles that might come into the state.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just follow up on that. Mr. Kirkmeyer, what specifically in authority is Department of Transportation missing, or in statute missing, that prohibits us from safely regulating 4 and 5s?
Mr. Chairman, again, not the legal expert, but initial analysis by the legal sub-working group tends to indicate that the actual licensing and registration of vehicles without a human driver, we don't really address that. Also, initially, based upon what the feedback I've received from Major Walther, who's the Highway Patrol SME in charge of the Safety and Training Working Group, we do lack some policy or some guidance on first responder training for these types of vehicles, and or for level 4 type vehicles where they might have a safety driver. We don't address the training of the safety driver in the autonomous vehicle. But again, that's a very preliminary analysis, and I expect that to be fully vetted out after our August meeting and prior to getting ready for September's JTC.
Thank you. And then Mr. Kirkmeyer, I want to kind of back up a little bit. You had, and General Reiner went into this slightly with the conversation of companies maybe who he says, okay, we haven't seen companies reach out maybe that want to do testing. And so really there's two worlds in autonomous vehicles, right? There's testing, those who want to test, and those who have already been gone through testing and now they want permitting and they want the ability to drive. And you had mentioned that early on in your presentation. And my question for you, Mr. Kirkmeyer, is, has the Joint Transportation Committee made a policy decision regarding which path to take, or are all paths open? And, you know, this is kind of what I think Senator Rothfuss was alluding to. You could, studying it without knowing what the clear direction is doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But if it's all policy and everything's on the table, then that makes sense to me. But it also makes sense to me to narrow the field and say, well, Wyoming's we're just gonna create a zone that's for testing and only testing. It's a lot more simple, requires a lot less regulation, requires a lot less know-how, and it's kind of step number one. And then you go to step number two. Okay, now we know, we got our arms wrapped around it, we know a lot about it. Maybe now we're gonna allow for permitting. But ultimately, my question just is, what is the direction from the committee, or have we even made a policy choice?
Mr. Chairman, what I can tell you is I work for the director, and the guidance he's given me, I would have to defer to whatever policy guidance the director has received from the JTC. Again, Senator Von Flanern is a member of the working group, and if he's had conversation with the director, I would refer to the director. However, I will tell you that the director is correct. Based upon the information that we've been able to obtain so far, to include from some AV companies we've talked to, they tend to test in their home base, right? They're already there. They have already built the infrastructure to test. And unless we have something that we ourselves want tested, which we haven't identified anything that's unique to Wyoming that they can't test elsewhere, or a company decides that we have something unique that they want their AVs to be tested against. Right now, I don't see a big market for testing in the state. However, if we establish the appropriate framework for registration, licensing, and everything for either testing or integration, they'll be able to feed off of each other. So that's really our goal, is however we integrate it, whether it's for testing or operation, I think we can get that done. And I think we can get that done relatively soon. But I will defer to Director Reiner for any policy discussions he's had with the JTC, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Kirkmeyer. And General, I'll go to you in just one second. I just wanted to note, this is fascinating. I'm hoping as we get some industry comments in today, we can understand that testing question a little more. Mr. Kirkmeyer, when you mentioned there's anything, you know, testing in their home state, I think testing in the state of Arizona on a freight vehicle traveling at 70 miles per hour across an interstate is totally different than doing so on ice and wind in the state of Wyoming. So that's very fascinating to me, because I would think that those companies would want to test them in the inclemencies that are so unique in the state of Wyoming. But General Reiner, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would say, in this question of where are we, I think everything's still on the table. I agree with you. I'd like some people to come here to Wyoming to test on our roads in the middle of a winter snowstorm in February. And when you can't see the white lines and when you can't see, ahead. And because I'm really curious on how on how that works. I'm sort of, hey, let's move out and get going. And so I'm pretty interested in setting the framework for having the ability to go full bore. I think if we can get people here to test, that's great. But really, I could see a very short testing window, and in my mind, it'd be nice to have work on statutes that just allow the vehicles here as they arrive, because I think most of the testing will occur somewhere else, and I think it would be nice if we could offer our weather and our roads and our terrain for testing at a high altitude and inclement weather. Much like we're doing with the connected vehicles, which has really been such a successful program. So that's really where we're at. But I'll tell you, very much taking our lead from Joint Transportation Committee and Senator Von Flateren as the chairman on that. And I'm glad that he's part of the working group, because I think that's key to just really have a lot of legislative involvement as we sort of shape the way ahead.
Thank you, General. Committee, I have more questions. I just don't want to dominate the time, committee, if you have anything.
Mr. Chairman, we are a little short on time. We probably should hear from industry and then see if we have any general discussion and keep Mr. Kirkmeyer and General Reiner involved.
Okay, just one last question for you, General, or Mr. Kirkmeyer, whoever wants to try to tackle it. So I think we're on the same page in terms of, it sounds like you really want to get moving on it. And it seems like the biggest impediment is really, I'm going to see two pieces, because Mr. Kirkmeyer, you mentioned the word budget. That makes me a little nervous. So I'm curious, it's probably too soon for you to even give a thought. The main impediment is simply just getting these guys permitted. So you've got to have some type of system that says, okay, if you've been tested, licensed, and registered in any of the following states, then that's reciprocity or something similar. Okay, well, we're going to allow you in the state of Wyoming. If it's at that level, how difficult will it be for the Department of Transportation, using its current staffing and current infrastructure, to be able to permit and license if they've already been permitted and licensed in another state? Is that really going to require a budget appropriation? And if so, do you have any idea of what you're starting to look for in what you might be wanting budget-wise?
Mr. Chairman, very early. What I can tell you, sir, is what we've learned from other states. And from the perspective of testing, without exception, when I've talked to other states, if a state wants something tested on behalf of their infrastructure, it costs money. And really, those projects are handled somewhat separately and budgeted somewhat separately. We've not identified anything in our state where we want our infrastructure studied. To be fair, there is no standard. And as we talk to autonomous vehicle companies, because there's no federal standard for infrastructure requirements, they're trying to build their vehicles to really see everything it can see and adapt to whatever infrastructure is in place. What we hope, however, is eventually there is some sort of federal standard, and that makes it easier for everyone. As far as staffing, or, we might, in our analysis, be able to determine that we can register and license these vehicles with existing department capabilities and not have to add anything. It's just too early to know. I expect, though, that as we get the autonomous vehicle companies on board now in our working group, that will provide us a much better idea and opportunity to conduct this assessment and figure out if in fact we would require more staff or we would require anything else. Initial impressions are just not valid right now because we don't know enough.
That's fair, Mr. Kirkmeyer. General, any closing thoughts before we move the conversation on?
Mr. Chairman, no, I think this is a good introduction. We're at the beginning of the phase. We're fully vested in being part of the solution. I am looking forward to hearing words and guidance from industry. I'm glad they're part of our working group, and I think the conditions are set for us to be, thoughtful and deliberate in our approach, and appreciate the involvement of this group as well. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. We'll stay on board just as long as you want us just to be available and listen to the discussion.
Yep. Thank you, General. Thank you. Please, Mr. Kirkmeyer and General Reiner, hang around. That's right. We may circle back to you. Next, we're going to move to Mr. Wolf. You've been patiently waiting from the Self-Driving Coalition. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, sir. Let me share my screen and try and accomplish this seamlessly, if that's all right. Let's see here. How is it? Is my screen up
Yep,
board there?
perfect.
Yep.
Wonderful. Well, Chairman Olson, Senator Rothfuss, and members of the Select Committee on Blockchain, Financial Technology, Digital Innovation Technology. My name is Ariel Wolf, and I'm an attorney at the law firm of Venable LLP in Washington, D.C., and I serve as counsel to the Self-Driving Coalition for Safer Streets. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to present to the committee today. I'm going to start by providing some background on the Self-Driving Coalition and the work that we do. I'll then offer a brief overview of AV concepts and technology as needed, followed by a discussion about the coalition's approach to AV policymaking. Then happy to answer any questions you have at that point or anytime throughout the presentation. The Self-Driving Coalition was founded in April of 2016 by Ford Motor Company, Waymo, which was formerly known as Google's Self-Driving Car Project, Lyft, Uber, and Volvo Cars. Since then, we are proud to have added several new members: Argo, AI, Aurora, Neuro, and most recently, Cruise. The coalition is focused on enabling the development and deployment of fully autonomous vehicles. The cross-section of companies from the technology, automobile manufacturing, and transportation network sectors demonstrates the widespread interest in developing AV technology. Despite their different backgrounds, these companies came together to form the coalition because of their commitment to bringing the tremendous potential safety and mobility benefits of self-driving cars to consumers in a safe and swift manner. Our mission is to promote the benefits of fully self-driving vehicles and zero-occupant vehicles, and to support the safest and swiftest deployment possible of these innovative and potentially life-saving technologies. As I will explain, we are focused on advancing paths to deployment for fully self-driving and zero-occupant vehicles, level 4, level 5 in automation. A crucial component of our work involves engaging with stakeholders, including lawmakers and regulators at the state and federal levels, to understand the broader societal and economic opportunities of self-driving vehicles. In particular, we believe that state and local governments have an important role to play in fostering the rapid and safe development of this technology by managing driver licensing, vehicle registration, determining vehicle servicing requirements, and compiling crash data. The coalition believes states should continue to play leading roles in all of these areas with respect to fully self-driving vehicles. We therefore welcome the opportunity to work with the Wyoming legislature to realize these opportunities and bring this technology to the public in a safe and swift manner. The coalition strongly believes that fully autonomous vehicles have the potential to advance the personal safety of passengers and other roadway users. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration estimates that more than 38,000 Americans died in motor vehicle crashes last year, up from an estimated 35,000 in 2015. This upward trend in fatalities in the past 5 years is particularly frustrating, given that there were significant reductions before that time period. I would just note that while fatalities have actually gone down slightly over the past couple of years in between, it's my understanding that in Wyoming last year experienced a 32% increase in fatalities. Now, an estimated 90% of all crashes are in some way linked to human error, whether driving drunk, distracted, fatigued, or at excess speeds. Fully autonomous vehicles have the potential to reduce fatal traffic crashes because they remove human error from the driving process entirely. In fact, the U.S. Department of Transportation has projected that fully self-driving vehicles could significantly reduce the severity and frequency of crashes and fatalities. Self-driving cars also hold tremendous promise to transform mobility for the millions of Americans who are excluded from the traditional transportation options, including senior citizens and those with visual or other impairments. Technology can therefore help broaden economic participation and support greater independence. Self-driving cars also provide resources to food vulnerable and underserved communities. For instance, according to a report prepared for Congress by the Economic Research Service of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, about 2.3 million people, or 2.2% of all U.S. households, live more than 1 mile away from a supermarket and do not own a car. Self-driving cars can assist these populations by delivering necessary goods. In addition, self-driving technology has a great potential to reduce traffic congestion, improve environmental quality, and advance transportation efficiency. So I could go through some of the key concepts that are presented on this slide that are relevant to the ongoing policy discussions about AV technology. I don't want to take too much of the committee's time. What I would say is that as state legislatures work on their own AV legislation, we, the coalition, encourage lawmakers to rely on these concepts during the drafting process. Specifically, lawmakers should seek to align any definitions in state legislation with the definitions established in the Society of Automotive Engineers J3016 in order to help ensure, one, that there are consistent standards and terms used across states, and two, that the terms used accurately reflect the capabilities of the technology. So rather than walk through each of these, I mean, they'll come up at different parts of the presentation here, but happy to circle back to any of these concepts.
Mr. Chairman?
Oh yeah, Representative Greer.
Yeah, I think I'd like to ask a question, Mr. Wolf, as we move forward with this. And you know, so I see interstate commerce is one of those few appropriate areas for federal government. And so, and I understand the look on a state level to make sure there aren't any impediments that have been put up by state statute. But where are we on an overriding national policy? Because you can't have a patchwork of laws and expect this to work, because really, I guess from my view, I look at this more of an efficient way of for transportation of cargo, quite frankly. And that's, you know, when we look at our I-80 corridor, I think that's where we could see the biggest benefit achieved for the state. But just keep that in mind for us, please.
Thank you, Mr. Ariel. If you had a direct response, you can respond now. Otherwise, if it's going to come up in your presentation, that's great too.
Well, sure, Mr. Chairman and Representative. I think I'll get to.
Actually, sorry, Mr. Wolf. I called you by your first name. I'm sorry.
Oh, no problem, sir. Absolutely. I would be happy to address that. Well, I'll talk briefly on the federal role in just a few minutes, and in particular on the federal and state roles as they relate to each other. So if we can, I'm happy to address it at that point in time, if that works.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, that's fine. I just want to make sure I understand that relationship. Thank you.
Absolutely, sir. Well, I'll dive into that in just a minute. So slide 9, I think likely is familiar to some of the members of the committee, perhaps all. And this graphic shows the different levels of automation from 0 to 5. And the light blue represents the driver's role and the dark blue represents the vehicle systems role. And as you move from left to right, you'll see the human driver's role gradually diminishing and the vehicle systems role gradually increasing until full automation is achieved at level 5. So we've just a quick overview of how this works. We've enjoyed level 1 systems for decades in the form of cruise control. Today, we are starting to see more and more vehicles in the level 2 category when manufacturers combine technologies such as adaptive cruise control, lane centering technologies, and automatic emergency braking. Level 2 is in production today, and some consumers are becoming increasingly accustomed to this technology. As you know, it is important to note that in these lower levels, the driver is expected to maintain awareness and control of the vehicle the entire time. As highlighted by the red box, the coalition is particularly focused on creating pathways for level 4 or level 5 vehicles to be tested and deployed across the country. We think that these vehicles have tremendous potential safety and mobility benefits. So today, many AV companies are pursuing truly driverless approaches that do not rely on a human driver of any kind. And really, the only purpose of this slide, it's not to show some sort of version of a Batmobile, so to speak. It's really to highlight really what the objective, the end state is for a level 4, level 5 vehicles. Because once the human driver is out of the equation, and thus achieving the benefits that we've already described, it opens up opportunities to redesign the interior cabin and the entire concept of a car, which could mean removing steering wheels, pedals, and other design elements that would maximize the riding experience. Now, I want to be clear, this kind of evolution would require changes in federal law, federal regulation that have been set in motion and are underway already. But I just wanted to kind of give a sense of the fully self-driving vehicle vision ultimately. Here, I just wanted to show what the autonomous vehicle landscape, really the ecosystem, looks like, to give a quick snapshot of how complex and really exciting the ecosystem is. And I'll just say that if you look at autonomous driving systems, really the brains of an AV in the top left, to a number of companies, some of which are in our coalition, but that's not really the be all and end all. Below that are autonomous vehicle manufacturers, which are actually building the vehicles. And I would say here, what this slide is missing is, of course, the traditional OEMs, original equipment car manufacturers. Of course, are doing exciting things as well, and Volvo, Cars, and Ford are in our coalition. They're not reflected here, but you have vehicle manufacturers, the autonomous driving system innovators, but then you also have companies that are doing data and simulation that's required really to test and verify the safety of these systems, perhaps even before or alongside and parallel with testing on the roads. There's in the top right, there's sensor technologies, and their mapping and location-based services. At the bottom there, you see the vehicles need to know precisely where they are. So this is a very, it's a developing and emerging and exciting and complex ecosystem that incorporates a very interesting supply chain that we're seeing evolve today. So quickly, our coalition members are already bringing some of the many benefits of AVs to Americans across the country. I wanted to highlight just quickly some of those. Prior to the pandemic, Waymo's autonomous ride-hailing service, Waymo One, was providing thousands of Phoenix residents with rides to work, school, stores, and visits to family and friends. Neuro's zero occupant vehicles, that's the vehicle at the bottom, are delivering prescriptions, groceries, and other supplies in the Houston, Texas program that has operated since April 2019. In addition, Neuro operated 2 services for the state of California, where Neuro delivered medical supplies and food at 2 COVID-19 field hospitals. Lyft and its partner Aptiv surpassed 100,000 self-driving ride shares in Las Vegas this year. And during the pandemic, Cruise's self-driving cars have been used to help deliver groceries and food to San Francisco residents in need. A couple of other examples, Argo AI is a self-driving technology platform company that has partnered with Ford and Volkswagen to test in Pittsburgh, DC, Miami, Detroit, Palo Alto, and Austin. On top of partnerships with other companies in the industry, Ford recently released a year's worth of its self-driving data to help advance AV research. Uber's self-driving cars are testing in Pittsburgh, San Francisco, Dallas, and other cities. Aurora recently announced plans to test its self-driving cars and trucks in Texas. So those are just some examples that from our coalition of some of the activities that have been taking place on the AV side. In light of the great promise of AVs, it's perhaps no surprise that states and the federal government have taken an acute interest in using their respective authorities to craft a regulatory environment that helps facilitate the safe and expeditious deployment of autonomous vehicle technology. States have regulated vehicle operations while the federal government has exercised its exclusive authority over vehicle design, construction, and performance. And I think here's where we're going to circle back to the note, the question earlier. On the federal side, the federal government plays an important role with respect to AVs, consistent with the congressional mandate to establish a uniform national approach on vehicle design safety. The U.S. Department of Transportation has issued multiple guidance documents charting a particular path toward validating safe autonomous technology and has affirmed that its enforcement authority extends to AV technology. In particular, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration has begun rulemaking proceedings to address AVs in the context of crash avoidance, crashworthiness, telltales, and safety principles. Further, DOT has determined that certain aspects of the regulatory environment should remain fluid while this critical technology continues to take shape. So there's been a good amount of activity on the part of NHTSA and DOT and the federal government. And of course, Congress itself has debated and deliberated over legislation that would advance the federal government's role in overseeing the safety of AV design, construction, and performance. So that, in that sense, thinking about the federal and state roles, I think that's sort of the touchstone of on the safety side for design. And states, of course, are considering approaches in their traditional roles. On the state side, speaking of 29 states or 30, it depends how you count some of the platooning statutes, but they've enacted legislation related to AVs, and 11 states have issued executive orders relating to AVs. Currently, members of the coalition are most actively testing AVs in Pennsylvania, Texas, California, Arizona, and DC. So if I could quickly touch on the coalition's approach to AV policymaking. The coalition's general approach has three components: expanded testing and deployment of fully self-driving vehicles and zero-occupant vehicles, preservation of traditional state and federal roles with respect to motor vehicles, and maintaining the existing liability regime for vehicles. Now, with respect to testing and deployment, the Motor Vehicle Safety Act currently limits deployment exemptions from the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards to a maximum of 2,500 vehicles per year from a manufacturer's fleet for up to 2 years. So we believe that expanded exemption authority for NHTSA is important for safety innovations such as level 4, level 5 AVs to be deployed. So we advocate to Congress to increase the exempted fleet size, expand eligibility, and extend the exemption period to promote self-driving technology, safety, accessibility, and mobility benefits, and to advance consumer acceptance. On the state side, the coalition urges states to enable fully self-driving AVs to be tested on state roads and for states to create paths to deployment. That's going to be an important point in thinking about some of the discussion that's occurred already. In terms of state versus federal roles, the coalition supports clarifying that the federal government retains exclusive authority to establish and enforce national standards related to the safety, performance, and design of AVs. In addition, we support legislation that specifies that states retain their traditional roles with respect to the rules of the road, traffic enforcement, and insurance. We do not believe that self-driving vehicles present a reason to deviate from this well-established framework. And finally, the coalition strongly believes that existing tort law contains well-established principles to allocate fault and apportion liability among parties. Therefore, the coalition would support potential provisions of AV legislation that maintain this regime. With respect to state legislation, it is our view that if a state chooses to take legislative or regulatory action with respect to AVs, such action should allow for the testing and deployment of fully self-driving vehicles and zero-occupant AVs. Specifically, we believe that any state action should focus on removing impediments to the safe testing and deployment, thereby creating a pro-competitive environment and a level playing field for the emerging AV industry. More than a dozen states have taken this balanced approach to the testing and deployment of AVs in their jurisdictions. To assist states with crafting an approach that will allow for the safe and swift deployment of level 4 and level 5 AVs, we seek to be a resource for state regulators and lawmakers. So consistent with our goals, the coalition has created a model bill, and I do believe I shared that in advance. I'm not sure if it was circulated, but I'm happy to go through some of those provisions if there's time. And I, of course, I defer to the chairman and the committee members if there's sufficient time to quickly walk through the provisions.
Mr. Chairman, I did just send around that draft legislation. I thought we sent it around before, but I'm not sure of that, so I resent it out a few minutes ago. So members of the committee should have that available to them to go along. And I do think it would be useful to at least at a kind of high level, go through some of the key concepts of what is in that model legislation.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Senator. Happy to walk through that. So as noted, we've created a model bill, and importantly, our bill promotes safety while allowing for innovation to flourish by avoiding unnecessary restrictions on AV technology and by avoiding design mandates. The coalition believes it is important for states to avoid regulating the design or technology of AVs, as the federal government is tasked with establishing a uniform national approach in this area. And to the extent that states seek to impose additional standards, vehicle manufacturers may struggle to comply with dueling regimes. Our model bill therefore encourages states drafting AV legislation to focus on issues related to safety, insurance, accident reporting, and registration and titling. So here I'll walk through some of the key provisions of the model bill in the next couple of slides. So the first is the basic construct of authorizing the operation of AV technology without a human driver, or the essence of what the objective is. And really it comes down to three elements that we propose. So it's the authorization for a person to operate a fully autonomous vehicle, again, level 4, level 5, on public roads without a human driver, provided that one, this idea of a minimal risk condition, going back to the concepts from SAE J3016, that if there's a failure of the automated driving system that occurs that renders it unable to perform the dynamic driving task, that the fully autonomous vehicle will achieve this minimal risk condition. It's able to have a fallback safety measure that can take it off the road or slow down and then stop the vehicle. That's the first condition. The second is, of course, the fully autonomous vehicle is capable of operating in compliance with the applicable traffic laws and safety laws and regulations of the state. And then third, that the vehicle bears the required manufacturer certification label, that it's in compliance with the federal motor vehicle safety standards, or it has an exemption, a federal exemption, as I mentioned earlier, that we hope to expand. So with those three conditions, it's our understanding, or it's our belief that creates the appropriate construct for authorizing fully self-driving vehicles on the roads, in conjunction with a number of other provisions that we'll go through. So our model bill also would establish the automated driving system as a licensed operator of the vehicle. This, again, in response to questions about how to approach this issue of licensure. The ADS, the automated driving system, ADS, is considered the driver or operator for the purposes of assessing compliance with applicable traffic or motor vehicle laws. And it's deemed to satisfy the physical acts required by a driver or operator of the vehicle, and that the ADS is considered to be licensed. So that would sort of wrap a bow around that question of licensing under state law by deeming it to be the licensed driver and operator. On the question of insurance, our model bill would call for, prior to operating an AV on public roads, that the person would submit proof of financial responsibility satisfactory to the appropriate agency, and that the fully autonomous vehicle is covered by insurance. Now, of course, that would depend on the posture of the AV. It could be, we would recommend tying it to the applicable place in the state code. That would be for personal vehicle ownership or transportation network companies, if there is such a law in that state, leasing, vehicle rental, et cetera. So insurance requirements would match wherever the AV was fitting in that construct. So duties following crashes, of course, incredibly important issue. And for the State Department of Transportation and law enforcement, this is something that we feel strongly about in our model bill, that the AV needs to remain on the scene of the crash when required by, again, the law could have the appropriate reference, and that the owner of the fully autonomous vehicle or a person acting on their behalf needs to report any crashes or collisions consistent with the state crash reporting requirements. So that's, again, an important element. We understand how important it is to have that crash response, on the scene of any kind of accident, and of course the reporting itself. This just very quickly is we would recommend a provision that explicitly authorizes on-demand autonomous vehicle networks. That may or may not be necessary or applicable depending on the work that's being done to review the state code. If this is the kind of thing that's deemed to be precluded, we would recommend including it here as an explicit authorization. If it's already something that would be authorized, and it may not be needed. Registration and titling, we have a provision that would address that, and I think pretty self-explanatory. Controlling authority, and here I think it's important, this is essentially a preemption provision to ensure that within a state that there isn't a mini patchwork. Of course, we're focused on trying to avoid a patchwork across the 50 states that would impede the deployment of AVs that would bring the benefits. But of course, within a state, we believe it's important to ensure that there's a consistent approach within that state itself. We have a section on the operation of a motor vehicle with an ADS by a human driver. This is to address situations where there's a human in the vehicle, and addressing authorizations when a human is expected to take control. We're in a level 3 situation. But also in that section B, subsection B, that nothing would prohibit or restrict a human driver from operating a fully autonomous vehicle equipped with controls that allow them to control all or part of the dynamic driving task. So in the event or the situation we're seeing where a developing or a fully autonomous vehicle continues to retain those human controls, that the human could actually operate that vehicle. It wouldn't be the case that state law would inadvertently preclude a human from being able to continue to operate that vehicle if there were the controls to do so. That's the end of presentation. Happy to answer any questions, and thank you so much for the opportunity.
All right, thank you, Mr. Wolf. Questions, committee? Representative Lindholm.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Wolf, how many states have passed your model legislation?
So, thank you, sir. There have been about, I would say, maybe a dozen states that have constructs that are close to the model legislation. Of course, there's no state that just picked it up and passed it. But with respect to the basic construct, and in particular that first component we talked through with the 3-part process of authorizing fully autonomous vehicle operation, there are a number of states, Georgia, Florida, Colorado. I can get you the full list, but there's a number of states that have approached it that way, with some changes and deviations for each state, just naturally.
We got lots of questions. Senator Rothfuss, you did have your hand up before.
Mr. Chairman, I was just going to note that Michelle Peacock from Waymo has also joined us, and I don't think she was going to provide testimony, but she's here to answer questions as well. And I didn't have a question. I just wanted to make sure that we noted that.
Yep, thank you. Senator, another comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Wolf. Really great work here, and I appreciate the presentation and kind of the full 360 view on this topic. Do you have a sense of how the national trucking organizations feel about this type of model legislation, what concerns they have? And has there been any discussion about, I agree with the assertion that the tort liability should just remain the same for autonomous vehicles, but what is the counter argument to that, and what are those conversations? So 2 questions there.
Mr. Wolf.
Sure, Senator, thank you for the question. So on the trucking side, let me just make a note of the liability piece. We'll deal with that after. On the trucking side, there is a lot of excitement about the incorporation of autonomy into commercial vehicles. And of course, I would want to let the organizations like ATA and others speak for themselves on how they feel about this particular model bill. The model bill reflects the coalition's views, and so it's not something that's endorsed by other groups right now. Although I think it's fair to say that with respect to the objective of trying to have a national framework and having states that focus on the really the encouragement of safe and swift deployment, I think that aligns closely with the objectives as I understand them of other groups. Now, there are workforce issues that come up in the commercial vehicle context. Is a different kind of discussion. So, I would just put a flag in that. I think, and those discussions have happened at the federal level and at the state level. The liability side, a little bit reluctant to try and characterize the counter arguments of some of the associations that would put forward other constructs of liability regimes. I think that, as we look at it, we've looked at it pretty carefully and in depth, and we do understand, as we see it, that this existing regime, whether it's negligence and tort law or forms of product liability that derive from negligence, that can apportion fault, that those are they are well equipped to handle the innovations that are occurring. And I think it's important to note there that autonomy and innovation in this context is really on a sliding scale. And there have been innovations in safety for decades that this kind of liability regime has accommodated the rollout of these safety innovations. And so autonomy would be part of that evolution. The alternative, one might say, could be a strict liability regime that I think some have advocated for, which just don't think is appropriate in this context. Again, trying to bring the safety benefits forward and being able to leverage a regime that's worked well for safety innovation over the course of decades.
Any follow-up there, Senator? All right, Ms. Long. You're mute.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a question. Where is the Uniform Law Commission on this, if anywhere? Is there a study group, and have they reviewed your model legislation?
Yes, ma'am. So the ULC does have, I think, their own approach. We differ from their approach. There are some terminology issues, and speaking for the industry, I think that this is the legislation that reflects what the sort of leading companies that are developing AVs, understand to be the approach that would work best. And again, a number of states have picked that up and move forward with it. On the ULC side, it's a lengthier approach. There's a lot of provisions there, and it would be something I could be happy to follow up with you on, trying to think about the analysis there. But I would also direct anyone, yourself and others to that legislation for review as well.
Thank you.
Committee. Anything else? Yeah, Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ariel, I have a question just kind of about, Wyoming's position. We've got 41 other states that have already moved in this space, and I would say are out ahead of us. It sounds like around 12 have adopted something very similar to what industry considers to be model legislation. I guess the question I would have, this select committee is typically trying to identify areas where Wyoming can be a leader and be engaged in an active role. And the simple question I have is there space for Wyoming to become a leader in this field? Is there something more that we can be doing that you're not seeing from other states that we could help to facilitate and enable this sector? Or are there already enough states, since we're sort of number 42 at this point in time, that are out in front of us that honestly following might be just fine for Wyoming?
Mr. Wolf.
Well, Senator Rothfuss and members of the committee, I think it's of course, sort of the central question here and how to approach it. I do think that, and there are others I think that are going to present, what goes into a particular AV developer deciding to test in a place or not. I think it was mentioned earlier, home base kind of thing. I think that's a component. There's so many different factors that go into it. So I think it starts with having a regulatory framework that it's not just optimizing for industry, it's optimizing for safety, achieving the twin goals of safety and safe and swift deployment. I mean, and so the model bill attempts to find that balance. That's sort of the necessary but not sufficient condition. And when I listening to some of the questions, the commercial vehicle side, of course, is an interesting component for the state of Wyoming, and I think there's a lot of research and development going on in that space. So I think there may be opportunities to look along those lines. But again, ultimately, our model bill is agnostic as to passenger or commercial vehicle. Our approach is to optimize and find that balance. So I think, it starts with a regulatory environment that creates that framework, and then from there, I would defer to individual companies to provide an assessment of what goes into their calculus and coming to a particular state, because as we've seen, it's not just California, to pick one random state, but it's not just California. There's Texas, there's Washington D.C., there's Pennsylvania, and there actually are different approaches in each of those places and jurisdictions for on the legislative side. So there clearly are other factors that go into it.
Chairman, quick follow-up.
Yeah, please.
Well, along those other factors and the concept, obviously, Wyoming has some things to offer. There's no question. I think General Reiner mentioned this is a great place to train a vehicle for a blizzard and a snowstorm on I-80, for example. I don't think anyone can quite compete with us when it comes to blizzards on I-80. We've got that cornered. But I assume, harsh weather is not enough, and that governance and regulatory structure is an essential enabling factor for selection of a location. So what types of things are your companies, your groups looking for when they're saying, all right, well, we need a place to test, we need to work with a state, we need to partner? What are the keys there to develop that relationship?
Sure, Senator. Well, again, I do think it's that specific calculus is something for a particular company to answer, because I wouldn't want to characterize it as with broad brush. I think some things that come to mind, we've seen partnerships or the presence or proximity for a research institution that's engaged in this type of work is one thing. Again, Washington D.C. being a spot for testing, one can draw conclusions is for that particular spot, and of course, in other places, it's really just, it could be workforce, the opportunity for the particular engineers to be present, but that those types of distinctions are rapidly dwindling in our current environment, globally and nationally. So I don't want to characterize it and speak on behalf of any individual company, but I do think those are some considerations that would be worth exploring with the companies that the department is engaging with.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Wolf, I wanted to follow up on Representative Greer's question and maybe try to pose that to you a little broader. You had mentioned in response to Representative Lindholm's question, there's 12 states that have something close to the model. We understand a majority of states have, there's a lot out there going on. And so I want to kind of pose that to you from an industry perspective. How is that coming together in terms of, you got just in those 12 semi-model states, you got 12 completely different laws. And we're dealing with, you had mentioned commercial, which is probably the most attractive piece to the state of Wyoming. You're going from state to state, you hit the border and you got a whole different rule or law or regulation to abide by, how are you going to get a freight liner across the country doing that? So just, can you take that a step further from the industry and the model law perspective? Is it truly really best for states to lead on this, or should we see more from the federal government for us to see the benefit that we want here in Wyoming?
Yeah, Chairman Olson, thank you for the question. I'm happy to go and take that a little further. I think, when it comes to the state legislation, the coalition, as I noted, formed in 2016. Each successive year, 2017, 18, 19, and then this year, even ongoing, state sessions are still open. We've had the model legislation, but if you look at it, there's just a wide variety of approaches that states have taken, and it ranges from where there's no path for actual deployment of AVs, testing permitting regimes that would result in arriving at a border and not being able to continue. Legislation that's taken the approach of really setting up an initial construct, but then requiring significant regulations to be issued by an agency that then delays it further. And then there's legislation that doesn't authorize fully driverless. It requires a safety driver. So there's just a whole panoply of we really have sort of backed into a form of a patchwork. So, big part of that is, I think, has been a delay on the federal side to come up with a framework. Congress came close in 2017. There continues to be a lot of discussion around that. And the Department of Transportation has, I think, made great strides in putting forward guidance for AV developers that in some part is intended to offer assurance to states to say, here's a number of rulemakings that we've initiated, and here's some guidance for a voluntary safety self-assessment to submit to NHTSA that companies are encouraged to walk through in developing the ADS. So I think we have arrived at this point where testing is happening really just not haphazardly, but it's happening in not in the way that I think if we were to take a blank chalkboard and just draw it up, we would have wanted. But I think the federal side of it, I think we're encouraged that there's movement, and I think it's the right approach, Mr. Chairman, to look to the federal government to provide more assurance on getting to the point where the states can focus on these roles. I think that's been the tension. Sort of in the absence of that development on the federal side, states in some ways have felt somewhat compelled to get into an area where I think has resulted in some drawbacks. So it really is just going to depend on the time it takes for the industry to provide that assurances on safety, and then for the federal government to continue to make progress on the initiatives they've undertaken.
Thank you. Committee, anything else for Mr. Wolf? No. All right, Mr. Wolf. Well, thank you. Very enlightening, and we're just still diving into this, so appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
All right, committee. Next, we have introduction of our draft legislation that we have, LSO 21 LSO 0044 version 0.05. David.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The bill draft, I'll just kind of walk through that. I'll try and be brief because we are a little bit behind.
Yeah.
Initially, I just point out this draft, in a sense, is two bills in one. One is in the staff comments based on Arizona's executive order 2018-04. What's in the draft itself is based on California Vehicle Code 38750. On page So of course, page 1 is just the bill title. Page 2, we start getting into the definitions. I guess I don't want to go too much unless you would like me to go through each definition, Mr.
Well, David, it's okay to walk through this. I'll note that we're technically not behind. We started 30 minutes late because we had some technical difficulties. And so my clock says that we would end this topic in about 15 minutes. So we're going to end up running against time, of course, but I think we should walk through it.
Fair enough. So this bill creates a new chapter, a new article, 3121-101 through 3121-107. You'll see that on page 1, the short title, Autonomous Vehicle Testing and Operating Act. And then 3121-102, we get into the definitions. It defines autonomous technology as technology that has the capability to drive a vehicle without a human operator. An autonomous vehicle is essentially defined, and that's on the top of page 3, as a vehicle equipped with autonomous technology that's integrated into the vehicle, and it specifically excludes anything that can be operated or cannot be operated without the active control or monitoring of a human operator, such as cruise control, lane assist, that sort of technology. The department is the Department of Transportation. It defines an operator of an autonomous vehicle as the individual seated in the driver's seat, or if there is no one in the driver's seat, it's the individual who causes the autonomous vehicle to engage. On page 4.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, Mr.
So, as is my nature, I'm overly cautious. And just what I want to be very careful of is to specifically exclude what's going on in agriculture, because we have autonomous tractors. I mean, we have global positioning systems, and almost all of our growers use that. And it is just used in the field. So I just want to make sure we're excluded. Those tractors are driven on the road from time to time, but that equipment's not designed for it. It doesn't have any AI technology, so to speak. It's all GPS. So I don't know, not really being that heavily involved in the YDOT statutes, but just want to make sure we're very clear that we don't somehow regulate something we don't intend to.
Thank you, Representative Greer. David, I can't recall, this is based off of California, so I doubt we have already an exemption for agricultural purposes in the bill.
Mr. Chairman, the bill draft itself does not have an exemption for agricultural purposes. However, it does only apply to vehicles driven on highways. So it would not be applied to a vehicle that's
right.
Field or something.
And I think Representative Greer's concern is that sometimes those tractors are going to cross over a highway going from one piece of land to the other. Let's just make a note, Representative Greer, that we can squeeze in an exemption, but David will need to know. I'm not familiar with those statutes either. Maybe there's already something.
Yeah, no, my growers like to drive their tractors right through town. I mean, it isn't just crossing over the highway.
Well, okay. We'll make a note. We'll take a look at it.
Continuing on top of page 4, a manufacturer of autonomous technology is the original manufacturer of the vehicle, or if it was not originally manufactured with autonomous technology, it is the company that modifies the vehicle by installing that technology. It then defines person as a natural person, firm, co-partnership, association, limited liability company, or corporation. At the bottom of page 4, we see the definitions as outlined as what would be, if the committee were to choose to go with Arizona's, or modeled after Arizona's language. That, I would note more closely, follows the recommendations provided by Mr. Wolf. It defines an automated driving system, and these are the same, I think they're essentially the same definitions that were in the slides that Mr. Wolf had provided previously. So it kind of gets into a little bit more detail than California's legislation does. It defines an automated driving system as the hardware and software collectively capable of performing the entire dynamic driving task, or in other words, driving the vehicle. And that it specifies what that dynamic driving task is, as that it can perform all real-time operational and tactical functions required to operate a vehicle. And it includes, on page 5, it specifies what those functions are, such as lateral vehicle motion control, steering, longitudinal motional control, acceleration, deceleration, and those types of things. It defines a fully autonomous vehicle as a motor vehicle equipped with an automated driving system designed to function at level 4 or level 5. It defines a minimal risk condition as a low risk operating mode in which a fully autonomous vehicle without a driver without a human person, would either bring the vehicle to a stop or something similar if there's a failure in the automated driving system. The operational design domain is defined as a description of the specific operating design domain in which an automated driving system is designed to operate. Things such as the type of roadway, the speed range it's allowed to operate within, environmental conditions, and that sort of thing. And at the top of page 6, it specifies or defines what SAE J3016 is. That's the taxonomy and definitions for terms relating to driving automation systems for on-road motor vehicles, published in September 2016 and updated in June 2018. Moving back to the California legislation, in the middle of page 6, it sets up Wyoming Statute 3121-103, the legal requirements for testing. It specifies that no person shall operate an autonomous vehicle on any highway in Wyoming for testing purposes, unless it meets the following requirements. It requires that the driver possess the proper type of license for the vehicle. It requires that the autonomous vehicle is operated on highways in this state by employees, contractors, etc., of the manufacturer of the autonomous technology. That the driver should be seated in the driver's seat and monitor the operation of the vehicle and be capable of taking over if necessary. And on page 7, that prior to the start of testing, the manufacturer shall obtain an instrument of insurance, surety bond, or proof of self-insurance in the amount of $5 million in accordance with rules promulgated by the Department of Transportation, and shall provide evidence to the department of that surety. For this section, Arizona's language is shorter and simply outlines that it provides a testing or operation of self-driving vehicles on Wyoming highways with or without a person in the vehicle. They're required to follow all federal law, Wyoming laws, and any rules of the department. 3121-104, back to the California version, would apply application certification requirements. Moving to page 8, this would apply to vehicles when they are wanting them to actually be licensed. When we're moving beyond just testing, is when 104 would come into play. And it provides that except as provided in 3121-103, the previous statute, that an autonomous vehicle shall not be operated on Wyoming highways until the manufacturer submits an application to the department, and that application is approved pursuant to rules adopted by the department and contains at minimum a certification by the manufacturer that the technology satisfies all of the following requirements: that the autonomous vehicle has a mechanism to engage and disengage the autonomous technology that's easily accessible to the operator of the vehicle, that the autonomous vehicle has a visual indicator inside the cabin to indicate when the technology is engaged, that the autonomous vehicle has a system to safely alert the operator if there is a failure in the autonomous vehicle technology, and when an alert is given, the system shall do either of the following. It shall require the operator to take control of the vehicle, or if the operator does not or is unable to take control, the autonomous vehicle shall be capable of coming to a complete stop. The autonomous vehicle shall allow, and we're over on page 9 now. The autonomous vehicle shall allow the operator to take control in multiple manners, including through the use of the brake, acceleration, steering, things of that nature. And it shall be required to meet all of the federal motor vehicle safety standards for that vehicle's model year. And on the top of page 10, the autonomous technology does not render any of those safety standards inoperable in the vehicle. The autonomous vehicle has a separate mechanism in addition to and separate from any other mechanism required by law that will capture and store the autonomous vehicle technology sensor data for not less than 30 seconds prior to a collision between the autonomous vehicle and another vehicle, object, or natural person while the vehicle is operating in autonomous mode. And that sensor data should be stored for at least 3 years following the date of any collision. It will also require a certification that the manufacturer has tested the autonomous technology on highways and complied with those testing standards established by rule of the department, and a certification that the manufacturer will maintain an instrument of insurance in the amount of $5 million as specified by rule of the department. Arizona's language on page 11, about halfway down, require testing or operation of a fully autonomous vehicle that a person be present unless rules promulgated by the department allow otherwise, and that they have been complied with. It would require that unless an exemption or waiver has been granted by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, that the vehicle be equipped in compliance with all applicable federal law and motor vehicle safety standards required of that vehicle. On page 12, if there's a failure of the automated vehicle system, then the vehicle must be able to obtain obtain a minimal risk condition that's previously defined. The fully autonomous vehicle is capable of complying with all applicable traffic and motor vehicle safety laws of Wyoming, and that the person testing or operating the vehicle may be issued a traffic citation or other applicable penalty in the event the vehicle fails to comply with those laws. The fully autonomous vehicle meets all the applicable certificate, title registration, licensing, and insurance requirements. And that if the person fails to submit the statement outlined in subsection A, which is just those requirements that we just went over, the director of the department may revoke any permissions to operate a fully autonomous vehicle on Wyoming's highways until they've applied. And finally, the automated driving system of a fully autonomous vehicle and the person required to submit a statement to the department is subject to all applicable laws, rules, ordinances, and statutes, and upon full compliance shall be considered licensed to operate that vehicle. Back to California law at the bottom of page 12, 3121-105, the department shall approve an application that they've submitted in order to allow someone to operate their own autonomous vehicle. If it finds that the applicant has submitted all information and completed all the necessary testing requirements for that autonomous vehicle and that they are safe to operate on Wyoming highways. And all of that's pursuant to rules adopted by the department. If the application, and this would be the application of the manufacturer for a specific vehicle, if that application seeks approval to operate without the presence of a driver inside the vehicle, the department is authorized to impose additional requirements to ensure the safe operation of that vehicle, and may require the presence of a driver if it determines that such is necessary for the safe operation of the vehicle. The bottom of page 13, 3121-106 would require that federal regulations promulgated by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration regulating the vehicle supersede provisions of this act if they are found to be in conflict with this The California Vehicle Code has some additional requirements that were not included in this bill draft. The committee may consider. One is simply a requirement that the department post public notice on its website and be limited in application until at least 10 days, that they are required to give at least 10 days notice and can't move forward until 30 days after the public notice is required or provided. And they also require that the manufacturer of the autonomous technology installed on a vehicle provide a written disclosure to a purchaser of what information is collected by the autonomous technology equipped on the vehicle. So that's sort of a privacy provision that we could include should the committee desire. Finally, 3121-107 requires rulemaking by the department, setting forth the requirements for insurance, surety bonds, self-insurance, and other factors of the application for approval to allow operating of an autonomous vehicle on Wyoming roads. On page 15, the rules required shall include testing, equipment, and performance standards the department concludes are necessary for the safe operation of the vehicle with or without the presence of a driver. And the department may consult with any entity that has expertise in those areas. The department may also assess a fee upon a manufacturer that applies pursuant to that basically requests approval to have or autonomous vehicles operate on Wyoming roads outside of testing, and that they can apply a fee for that to recover any costs reasonably incurred by the department. And the department is authorized to establish by rule any additional requirements that it determines are necessary to ensure the safe operation of autonomous vehicles on highways. Finally, on page 16, the department shall hold public hearings on the adoption of any rule applicable to the operation of an autonomous vehicle without the presence of a driver. So that just kind of adds that extra requirement. If they want to allow driverless vehicles, it would be required to hold a public hearing. Arizona's language differs. At the bottom of page 16, it provides the department and any other agency with regulatory jurisdiction to take necessary steps to support testing and operation of vehicles, including the department in coordination with law enforcement agencies shall issue a law enforcement interaction protocol addressing fully autonomous vehicles. In other words, they would need to come up with some regulations, some guidance on how first responders would interact with autonomous vehicles. Prior to the issuance, on page 17, prior to the issuance of the law enforcement interaction protocol, testing or operation of fully autonomous vehicles may be conducted on Wyoming highways consistent with this act. The department is required to complete a review and provide a report to the Joint Transportation Committee of any relevant statutes describing which provisions may no longer be necessary or inapplicable or should be updated with regard to their application no later than September 1st, 2021. And the department shall undertake a review of the current title and registration policies and procedures and make any necessary changes to ensure law enforcement and the general public have the necessary pertinent vehicle information in the event of a collision. And finally, the department is authorized to promulgate rules as necessary for this act. Moving back to California law, it also requires that the department shall conduct a review and provide a report to the Joint Transportation Committee by September 1st, 2021, with respect to any statutes it feels need updated or changed. Page 18 puts in place an effective date for this act of July 1st, 2021. I would note for the committee that a split effective date would likely be necessary in this bill. We would want to allow the department to promulgate rules prior to the effective date of the act. So that would be a change needed in this draft. And I would stand for any questions.
All right, thanks, David. Representative Greer.
So, Mr. Chairman, as I go through this, heard the conversation and what we've talked about in the past as we were looking at testing. So this bill goes a little bit further and is a pathway forward to authorizing autonomous vehicles. And I mean, that's fine. If that's what this committee wants to do, though, I would, just from a structure standpoint to begin with, is I would start out with the authorization, do your definitions, and then come in and say no autonomous vehicle will be able to operate on the roads, and then except when certified, or we go through that process, and then talk about the exception to that general rule being for testing purposes. And again, I reiterate this component, maybe looking at the Arizona definition maybe solves my concern regarding what's going on in the field, which is already an established technology, but also being very careful that we don't somehow regulate something we don't intend to. So that's just my general comment, as the structure starts out with the testing component without making it clear, okay? And I'm just saying, as we read statutes, how we go through those. And then my final concern is we set something out in statute, but then we say, well, maybe the statute won't mean a damn thing if the federal government changes its regulations, which makes it difficult for people who are giving advice on our statutes. So just some things for us to consider.
Yeah, thank you, Representative Greer. And I agree very strongly with your first point. That's the conversation I tried to have with General Reiner, is trying to figure out what the working group was assigned to truly do from Department of Transportation. All starts with a policy question, and the policy question is what you just hit the nail on the head with. Is it everything? Is it testing and driving? Is it just, or operation, or is it just testing? And I think that's what this committee definitely has to wrestle with. I think there needs to be really clear guidance going forward at what is the policy choice of the legislature. Is it testing and operation? Is it operation? Is it testing only to start? What is it? Senator Dockstader.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To follow up, where's the federal government on this? We're stepping into it. I heard the number 40 some odd states involved now, but where's the federal government as far as establishing something that's across the nation and allowing this to proceed?
Senator Rothfuss, you can answer that.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And to Senator Dockstader's question, the impression I have from the Self-Driving Coalition is that they're still working on it. There certainly are some federal sideboards that are governing, but they're trying to make sure that the states have flexibility at this point in time as this moves forward. And with the proposed draft of the Self-Driving Coalition, it's my understanding that the components of that draft are still at the state level, where what's not in that draft is being accounted for at the federal level through National Highway and Transportation Safety Administration. So there is federal governance and guidance more towards the safety side of things, as well as the regulation of the safety of the vehicle, of what's going to make it onto the highway, so to speak, what's going to be approved. But there still is broad discretion at the state level, and that's the space that we're playing in. So my understanding is that there is kind of a clear division right now of what the state responsibility currently is. And then I think, pursuant to what Chairman Greer was talking about a little while ago, at some point we'll probably move more towards a national standard once there's a better idea of what that standard should look like. But states are being the innovators right now.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, and I was just going to make a general, oh, sorry, I'll save my general observation. Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So one concern that I have, or one question I have, if anyone is aware of any of these test companies are interested in coming to Wyoming to test, I mean, is there an immediate return on our investment for moving this forward here in Wyoming. I mean, this is happening, right? I mean, whether we make a policy decision now or not, I mean, autonomous vehicles are coming our way, and they're coming in the form of big rig trucks as well. So, I mean, there's no point in denying that, or even, having a discussion. It will happen. But is there any way that we can get ahead of that and potentially have revenue coming from that and really being the space for it in a meaningful way? Just to acknowledge second point, Caitlin Long's question that she put in the chat before she had to depart, which was a very, I think, astute observation that she made, which is not surprising, but kind of gets into the weeds. I understand we kind of brought the conversation back to whether or not the legislature wants to make a policy decision about this or not. I think that decision's already been made for us, as I indicated, but she says, will there be a rule pertaining to evidence preservation when there's a crash? If a software bug caused the crash, the seller can just send an upgrade and cover that up. Is there an immutable way to capture the software at the moment of the crash to preserve the evidence? And I think that's a very good question. In litigation, typically and historically, in some type of crash or some type of personal injury type action, a preservation letter goes out, which instructs all the parties to preserve all the evidence to maintain the status quo so that can be investigated. A failure to do that can result in a secondary cause of action for spoliation of evidence. But in this type of case and in this circumstance, and we certainly know how many of our Wyoming citizens get killed on our roadways each year involving tractor trailers, it's an important issue to address, I think, in understanding the preservation of evidence issue. Again, I think for right now that's in the weeds, but I would ask our LSO to take note of that particular issue for us to consider moving forward of the need for automatic preservation of evidence because of the ability to override the software. And I don't know if that's legitimate concern or not as a result of the technology in these automated vehicles, but certainly a concern. I know trucks now have black boxes, which you can get the information from, but these might be different. So a good question, I think, from Ms. Long. And so then back to the question of, is there a commercial interest now that we can avail ourselves of to get us to act faster and more quickly?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. And certainly, David, if you'll make a note on that, on the evidence preservation. And, I did trucking defense litigation for a couple of years right out of law school. And I remember the way it worked was when the wreck happened, you got the call and you went out to immediately begin preserving evidence. I mean, this is not even contemplating this type of technology, but just the preservation of evidence begins at the moment of the crash. But I do agree there's some legal issues as technology may be faster than the law. I was wondering if Mr. Wolf, I don't know if you can weigh in on the commercial question, but or if anyone else can, but I don't see if Michelle is still on here. I don't think she is, but Mr. Wolf.
Mr. Chairman, I think she hopped off, but I'm happy to address a couple of things. The first is just a note about the federal state thing from a minute ago. I do want to make it clear that, with respect to federal motor vehicle safety standards, if, from the perspective of federal law, if an AV developer currently equips a vehicle that is currently otherwise compliant with federal motor vehicle safety standards, but has it driven by an ADS, an automated driving system, but it still has a steering wheel and all of the other elements that comply with federal law. I think the position is, there are some nuances to this, but that those, from the perspective of federal law, that's something that's acceptable to move forward with. Now, that doesn't mean that the federal government is not actively working on ways to provide assurance and to adapt the motor vehicle safety standards to provide additional flexibility, additional ways to do it. But it's important to understand, I think, that federal law right now, companies are looking at equipping, a Chrysler Pacifica minivan with a driving system that accomplish that. On the I guess the commercial side, I would just emphasize the one point that coming back to the beginning of my earlier remarks, which is that testing and deployment from the perspective of the industry, need to go hand in hand, because while testing happens first and then comes deployment, of course that's critical. Not having a path to deployment is really precludes the ability to invest in a particular jurisdiction. So while it is stepwise from the perspective of the evolution of the technology, any kind of framework really for an industry, for companies making a decision to go here or there, need to see that path to deployment clearly in law, either implicitly or even better, explicitly. So I think that's kind of the key facet to that component for on the commercial side.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Wolf. I don't know if that doesn't get you necessarily the answer you wanted there, Senator. I know I'm in the same boat as you. I want the ball to move faster. I think General Reiner even mentioned he wants the ball to move faster, but he had mentioned there's no one really reaching out at this point saying, hey, we want to test. I was just going to ask General Reiner as a follow-up. You said there was no entity reaching out that wanted to test. Have you had entities reach out to you who want to practice, operate in the state of Wyoming, particularly commercial?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, thank you. So just last week, in fact, there was an inquiry regarding autonomous vehicles in the area of Yellowstone. And so there is now a commercial, and that would be a commercial entity. And so I think that will push us along. After listening to this discussion, I really am starting, I think, sense that testing is a component of any legislation that would be implemented. And that my sense would be that we should, my recommendation is at this point, is that we look at legislation to implement this across the state, and it includes testing, because I'm not sure that a stair step will get us where we need quickly enough. And so I think you look at a package deal would be my sense. Let me see if Mr. Kirkmeyer might want to add to something on that, if you're all right with that.
Okay, yep, I'm fine with that, Mr. Kirkmeyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Director. Yes, I completely agree. During our analysis, and as we see this, and especially based upon the people we had reach out to us last week, I can see the possibility of a fully tested vehicle being asked to be put in operation into Wyoming before we ever conduct any testing. So the flexibility of legislation to allow both, I think, is critical. In this case, the Yellowstone project is a National Park Service thing, and they're putting out a bid for a company to supply shuttles. And so it won't be just one company that could possibly apply. It could be more than one. And in this case, if they have a fully tested vehicle that has either the federal waiver or has the NHTSA approval, we could be then asked to consider putting these types of vehicles in the state without having conducted any testing. So we probably would be likely better to have that flexibility in the legislation.
Excellent, thank you. Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'm sensitive to time and know that we probably have to get rolling, but I think one of the things we need to figure out is whether this committee wants to tackle this question or whether we want to hand off to the Transportation Committee. And I think it really comes down to the question of this is a committee that is really trying to get to leadership positions and get out in front. And is there something for us to get out in front of here? Or are we sort of late enough to the game that isn't a viable possibility, at which point, honestly, I think we take our work product and hand it to the Transportation Committee if that's how we feel. Is there something in this for Wyoming where us moving quickly on it can position us to benefit the state? And I think that's probably the next discussion we need to have. We don't need to, we're certainly not going to vote on a bill today. There's no question about that. We've got a lot to explore, and we've developed some excellent work. I appreciate Kelly's work. I appreciate David's work, and certainly everyone who's engaged with us. But I think that's what we probably need to tackle is, do we want to move forward as this select committee, or do we want to hand our work over to the Transportation Committee and let them proceed? And I think we should have that discussion and then probably get to the next topic. We won't be concluding much more today.
Yeah, thank you, Senator Rothquist. And I'll make I was going to make a general comment before I yielded to Senator Nethercott, and I guess I'll make it now because it dovetails off of what you just said. One thing that I find, at least in the legislation that we have in front of us, doesn't have to be the vehicle if we decide to move forward. You know, Chairman Greer kind of referenced some different ideas too. But the one thing about the legislation in front of us that I find very interesting is that we actually allow for in this bill a lot of broad rulemaking discretion. And so I say that because I think there's a path in front of us. There very well may be a path in front of us where this committee takes the topic. And I don't think it hurts the good work of the working group or dilutes the good work of the working group at all. Because at the end of the day, this legislation, while it authorizes operation, it then says, okay, when a vehicle is allowed to operate, it must meet the following requirements. Department of Transportation tell us what those are. And so I think, you know, if we do go down that path, just a thought for the committee here is that General Reiner and YDOT and the working group, and there's still, that work still has to go forward because Department of Transportation still has to wrap around all of the rules and regulations that are actually going to matter. So there's that to consider, whether it's us or the Department of Transportation that drops a bill. The reality is you need a bill that simply just authorizes operation. And you can either have in statute all the rules and not rules and regulations, but all the certifications, licensures, permitting, et cetera, or you can leave that up to YDOT. So just something for the committee to chew on, that I think there's a path there to continue as we are, but I'd love to hear what the committee has to say. Representative Lindholm.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess my opinion is the reason why I was so apt to shove this forward is to try and find an opportunity that would attract industries. And I think everybody's on the same page in that regard. In regards to some of the comments that, you know, we don't even know if anybody's interested in coming to Wyoming or if they're even interested in participating. We've used legislation in the past multiple times as kind of a banner to companies, and it's worked successfully in different areas. Will it work in this situation? I don't know. But I do think if we were to run the ball on this, I'm sure it'd make Director Reiner flinch a little bit. But I would definitely be apt to adding some more radical ideas to the bill to definitely pull in some of these outfits. If we're going to go down that road, I do think it's more appropriate in the Transportation Committee. But I also know that this is a pretty radical crowd in here, and nothing against the Transportation Committee. It's just, if we're going to do some wild stuff, this is the place to do it.
Committee, anyone else want to weigh in on? We're just trying to figure out whether we're even going to take this topic forward from here. Representative Greer.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, you recall the last meeting, I argued strongly that this ought to just be with the Transportation Committee. But my question is, okay, so we've started down this path, and I like what we've got. I've got my comments and how I think we could make it better. And of course, there's draft legislation. But is the Transportation Committee going to sponsor legislation this year? To me, that's the question. If they're not, just go ahead and go forward. I mean, I like where we are, but if they're going to, there are little nuances, especially when we come to working with YDOT and rulemaking and the interplay between state rules and laws and federal rules and laws, that Transportation Committee is probably a little more adept at, should hopefully have a little more depth than we do. So can anyone answer that question? Are they intending to bring legislation this year?
Yeah, thanks, Representative Greer. And we had asked the good chairman of transportation to be here. Unfortunately, he couldn't. That was one of the reasons why we wanted him. But I know that Senator Rothfuss, you've had a lot of conversations with him I don't know if you can help enlighten us.
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. My understanding, and General Reiner can certainly weigh in as well based on his understanding, but there wasn't a certainty that there was going to be legislation brought this year, but they set up their working groups and they've started to address this. And we had a kind of a timeline laid out by General and his staff of what that path forward was. And it was a judicious path. It was going to take a while, and I don't think it assured any legislation this year. In my conversations with Senator Van Flatern, if we had something that seemed to get the ball moving this year, he was not averse to it, and he was not averse to necessarily having it go through his committee later. But again, it was very up in the air based on how these discussions moved forward. I think it really comes down to what Chairman Olson was saying and Representative Lindholm. If we want to do something dramatic and we want to be very game changing and be aggressive on this, I think this is the appropriate place to do it. The path that the Transportation Committee had is a reasonable path and it gets the job done, but it's not that same level of let's do something exciting and novel and try to take a leadership position of it. So I think that's really the choice, and I see both sides of it, honestly. I mean, I'm open to this discussion and am not set on either. And I see Senator Nethercott does have some thoughts.
Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let's drive it forward with us in the driver's seat.
And Senator or Representative Yin too. I see him raising his hand.
Oh, Representative Yin. My eyes look down there every once in a while because you're down at the bottom of my screen, and I'm not sure if a cat's crossing the screen or if it's your hand.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, committee, I would say we should move forward. I think if we could let the Transportation Committee deal with it, but the longer that we let that happen with if there is no legislation moving forward, the more opportunity that other states have to put out the banner, as Representative Lindholm was saying, of attracting that industry to other places. So I think the sooner that we can get something done, the better. So I'm fine with us moving forward with it, especially if there is no certainty that the Joint Transportation Committee would do anything, especially given that this is a general session coming up. If we don't do it this general session, I doubt that we'd get it done in a budget session, which would mean like another 2 years before we get anything done.
Thank you, Representative Yin. Senator Driscoll.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd like to reiterate that I think this is the committee for it. It's got the track record of attracting the technology and the people. And I think ultimately it's going to go through transportation anyway. But we do put as Representative Lindholm put it, the special spin on some of these bills that tend to help them drive some business to the state. So I do think we should take it up. Thank you.
Senator Dockstader.
Thank you. Just a quick follow-up. We have been leading in other things to create the reputation as a state that we are out there in front with the technology. Transportation can follow up if needs be, but let's get the process rolling out of here.
All right. Senator Rothfuss.
I was just going to say, there we go. Let's keep moving this forward, and we're driving it forward as Senator Nethercott wants, and this community will be engaged. We'll make sure that we're working hand in glove with Senator Van Flatern and the folks in the Transportation Committee. And
perfect. Yeah, buckle up, General Reiner and Mr. Kirkmeyer. We got you on board. We're happy to have you on board, and looks like
thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We're going to up the pace a bit.
All right, thank you.
Tend to do that. All right, guys. Well, with that, let's go ahead and take a short break. We'll take a 5-minute, 10-minute break. What do you want?
Yeah, 10 minutes. Nobody comes back less than that, but let's get started 10:40.
All right.
Well, Mr. Chairman, looks like we've got some expediting of topics to see if we can work through here with electronic wills.
And I think we actually will. I think we'll actually catch up at the tail end. Mr. Co-Chairman, some of those working groups, I think we'll be able to fly through too, but I think this is a good topic right here too, that I think we can actually do some catch up on. All right, two of three senators, that's a quorum. 3 reps, 4 reps. All right, let's rock and roll. I think we've got, we'll have some people filtering in as we get going here, but we really want to try to make up some time because we did start late. So let's continue, please. The next topic we have is electronic wills. This is a topic based on a Uniform Law Commission model bill, if you will. So the way we'll begin this topic is actually with LSO. David will introduce us to the topic and to the Model Act, which we've done some just minor tweaking to. Again, it's just draft legislation. We're just, today we're just really tinkering with the idea. And so we've got at least some legislation in front of us, which helps guide that discussion. David.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll start with some background. The Uniform Law Commission finalized their version of the Uniform Electronic Wills Act in 2019. So far, no states have adopted it. 10 to 15 states are planning on introducing bills in 2021, and 4 states have passed non-uniform bills before the Uniform Electronic Wills Act was finalized. 12 states currently have issued executive orders allowing electronic wills on a temporary basis due to the COVID-19 restrictions. Walking through the bill on page 1, of course, the bill title introduction, there is the start of a staff comment there. That comment just outlines some of the uniform language that is not in the bill itself for the committee's consideration. Specifically on page 2, this bill draft does not include the short title, which simply would have include language in statute that this act may be cited as the Uniform Electronic Wills Act. It does not include section 6, harmless error. Currently, I don't believe Wyoming law has a harmless error statute. What that language would accomplish is that if the record is not executed in compliance with the Uniform Electronic Wills Act, with the statute, that it still may be acceptable if the record establishes by clear and convincing evidence that the decedent intended the record to be their will, or partial or complete revocation of their will, or an addition to a modification of their will, or a partial or complete revival of a previously revoked will. And the committee, there's language down at the bottom of page 2 that just explains the Uniform Law Committee's reasoning for a harmless error inclusion, specifically with regards to an electronic will. And their primary concern is with the ease of creating an electronic will, an individual may not realize that they need witnesses and things of that nature. And their position would be that by requiring clear and convincing evidence, that this would make it less likely to be used. On page 3, this bill draft does not include the uniformity of application and construction section, which simply would specify that in applying this act, consideration should be given to promote uniformity with respect to the subject matter among states that enact it. And the next paragraph lets the committee know that the language from section 8D of the uniform bill is incorporated specifically into Wyoming statute 26114. But the committee can consider that language if it prefers that specific language over what is incorporated in this bill draft. Section 1 specifies that Wyoming statute 26125 through 26129 are created. And that gets right into the electronic will itself, creates 26125 is the execution of the electronic will, which specifies in subsection A that an electronic will shall be a record that is readable at the time as text at the time of signing, that it's signed by the testator or another individual in the testator's name, physical presence, and by the testator's direction. That the bill is signed in the physical or remote presence of the testator by at least two competent witnesses within a reasonable time. That the signing of the will under paragraph 2 of this section, that the paragraph, and that the testator's acknowledgement of the signing of the will under paragraph 2 of this section, that the witnesses have witnesses, one of those two things. The intent of this testator, that the record under paragraph A1 of this section be the testator's electronic will, may be established by extrinsic evidence. At the bottom of page 4, we get into 26126, the law applicable to electronic wills and principles of equity, which specifies that an electronic will is, for all purposes of the law of Wyoming, that it is a will for all purposes of the law, that the law of the states applicable to wills and principles of equity apply to an electronic will, except as provided in the remainder of the electronic wills, newly created sections. 26127 specifies that a will executed electronically but not in compliance, specifically with the electronic will execution statute, is still an electronic will under this chapter if it's executed in compliance with the laws of the jurisdiction where the testator is physically located when the will is signed, or where he is domiciled or resides when the will is signed, or when the testator dies. On page 6, 26128 provides for the revocation of an electronic will and allows that an electronic will may revoke all or part of a previous will. That all or part of an electronic will is revoked by a subsequent will that revokes all or part of the electronic will expressly or by inconsistency, or that it may be revoked by a physical act if it is established by a preponderance of the evidence that the testator with the intent of revoking all or part of the will performed the act or directed another individual to perform that act. And that language is there specifically to deal with situations wherein an individual may create an electronic will and then, for example, save it on their hard drive and destroy the hard drive, intending that that destruction of the hard drive should destroy the electronic will. 26129 is the certification of a paper copy. It provides that an individual may create a certified paper copy of an electronic will by affirming under penalty of perjury that the paper copy is a complete, true, and accurate copy of the electronic will. If it is to be made self-proving, the certified paper copy shall include the self-proving affidavits. Section 2 modifies existing statutes, specifically with definitions under 21301. It adds a definition for electronic, which means that it relates to technology having electronic, digital, magnetic, wireless, optical, electromagnetic, or similar capabilities. It defines remote presence to mean that the relationship of two or more individuals in different locations communicating in real time to the same extent as if they were physically present in the same location. Page 8 defines an electronic will as a will executed electronically in compliance with Wyoming Statute 26125, which we reviewed previously. It defines a record to mean information that is inscribed on a tangible medium or stored in an electronic or other medium and is retrievable in a perceivable form. It provides a definition for signed to mean that with the present intent to authenticate or adopt a record, it to execute or adopt a tangible symbol, or sign means to affix or to logically associate with the record an electronic symbol of a process. At the bottom of page 8, it amends Wyoming Statute 26112, essentially by including that except as provided in the holographic wills, which is Wyoming 26113, it now includes that as well as electronic wills established in Wyoming Statute 26125. So it modifies the requirement that a will be in writing to the holographic wills, which is already there, and to electronic wills. On page 9, it amends Wyoming Statute 26114 self-approving wills simply by adding that a self-approving will, a witness may also sign under the electronic will statute. And it provides a new subsection D that provides for a signature physically or electronically affixed to an affidavit that is affixed to or logically associated with an electronic will under this chapter is deemed a signature of an electronic will. Section 3 provides that this act applies to the will of a decedent who dies on or after July 1st, 2021, and the effective date of the act is July 1st, 2021. With that, I would stand for any questions.
Perfect, David. Thank you. And I wanted to give a little bit of background here we have quite a few lawyers, but we also have some non-lawyers. So just a little bit of background here before Representative Lindholm's question of why don't we just have crypto wills on the blockchain. I'm 100% in favor of that as well. This is kind of the intermediate step, but if you want to really radically change centuries of process and just put wills on the blockchain, I think that'd be awesome too. But just a little bit of background for the non-lawyers. Wills, unlike multi-billion-dollar business contracts, which can be signed electronically from anywhere in the world and carry the same validity, as well as multi-million and billion-dollar trusts, the will is the creature that cannot be signed in such a way. Some of that's changing with COVID in terms of remote notarization, but the testamentary capacity has to be attested to by 2 witnesses that have to be present. And arguably that's very physically present. Existing case law says, hey, you can't even have your secretary in your law office, outside the room around the corner who could still hear everything, or the nurse who might be helping you witness at the hospital behind the curtain. So it's this very sensitive creature that's centuries old, so that everyone kind of gets that little introduction on what does this even really mean. It's kind of the only outlier there really is. Everything else, like I said, multi-billion-dollar business contracts can be executed digitally. And so that's the genesis of the idea of the bill, with the hope that one day you actually have crypto wills, which are much more secure than traditional paper would be for handling someone's final estate and assets. But with that, any questions for David? Senator Office.
It's not a question, but my quick comment is this bill, as I read it, and I have some frustrations with it, but it basically takes the state of Wyoming from, I don't know, say 1790 to 1990 in terms of technological competence when it comes to wills. But that's better than not doing it is about where I'm at right now. And maybe we can do better.
I think we can, but Mr. Kaufman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, full disclosure, I'm not an estate planning practitioner, but I ran this bill by a couple of my partners that are, and just a couple of red flags to throw up just that we may want to consider. First of all, I'm totally in favor of this, but so on traditional wills right now, when the testator and the witnesses sign, we require the wills to be notarized. This act doesn't mention anything about notaries. And so, the only problem with that from a legal perspective is we're creating a sort of a workaround. If you don't want to have it notarized, you just got to do it in an electronic format. And so we were just wondering from a policy perspective, if we should either address notaries in the Electronic Act, that would be one way to do it, or if maybe we should consider removing the notary requirement from the other act, just so that they're consistent, so that we don't have this weird workaround.
That's a great question, Mr. Kaufman. And David, you'll have to remind me here. I know when we were working, Senator Rothfuss and I and David through this bill, we got into the notarization question, and corporations has a topic that it's wrestling with. Maybe Chairman Lindholm can weigh in on remote notarization. And our thought was whatever kind of comes of that world in Chairman Lindholm's under his discretion, and as that bill moves forward, if it does, that we would wrap that into this, is what I thought the discussion was. But David, I thought we left something in place for notaries.
Mr. Chairman, I think that's correct. Whatever ends up coming from the Corporations Committee could certainly be applied to this. But I don't think the electronic wills would eliminate the need for a notary. I don't know that that's present in this draft. I think that Wyoming would still be require even an electronic will to be notarized, but I will double check on that. Not saying that with confidence I would like, but I don't think that it changes the requirements for a notary.
Yeah, let's look into that, because my understanding was that everything else that still applies in terms of the law existing around wills doesn't change. You still have to, everything else should apply, but it's still a policy question, I guess, for the committee. I don't know that I'm necessarily inclined to say eliminate notaries and then have digital witnesses, but I was more or less thinking in my mind that you would have remote notaries and remote witnesses. So that was kind of my initial thoughts. Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I too support the effort in this legislation. I think it's important that we move to where life is really going. But I litigate probably one every 3 to 5 months, a case of testamentary capacity, which is, did the person who signed the will actually have the competency to sign the will? And so I'm doing that now with old school in person signing the will with real life people present. But I do question and wonder how that might look differently. And so how these always also take place, and how I think this would be helpful for the client or the individual who's not coming physically into my office, because it never happens from the signing of a will in an attorney's office. It always happens in a hospital room or a nursing home room. And those are the circumstances for which that would take place. And I think where an electronic will can be very helpful, where an individual can sign electronically that way with technology. But I'm just curious if anyone is aware, and I haven't done the research, Mr. Hopkinson or Representative Olson or Kaufman, on any litigation concerning the abuse of this as it relates to the ability to manipulate and question and create further loopholes or ways for vulnerable adults to become victimized using this type of technology. Or does it do the opposite of create more protections? You know, I mean, I could see it being both ways, but I want to make sure that the law we have favors those protections in place. So for example, I can see the remote presence, communicating in real time being the statutory requirement. That's very bright. I mean, that's a really important concept for communicating in real time, as opposed to recording the testator, which is the person signing the will, at a time when they're lucid versus 5 minutes later when they're not. How that can be manipulated. So any thoughts, questions, conversations about that, so I can share that with my colleagues too about concerns over this issue?
Yeah, thanks, Senator Nethercott. And I agree, we should definitely be in the same, I think the same conversations kind of come up around the remote notarization as a whole, because it spans the gamut of what you're looking at. I'll just say one of the things I really struggle with on trying to get wills into the 21st century is that compare them to trusts. The reality is that if you have an estate that is large enough, that you're dealing with millions, tens, hundreds of millions, billions of dollars, you don't have just a simple will. And so the estates where there's so much at risk, I think the fascinating thing is that we already execute those in the way that we're talking right now. You don't have to have these extra levels of witnesses. And if the trusts are funded properly, then a probate isn't necessary, or it's highly, highly minimal. So that's kind of one of the things I struggle with, is that I'm trying to understand why we put such an elevated safeguard on the will when it's becoming more of an outdated creature of estate planning. It seems to be more limited for smaller estates, but maybe that's where also fraud can spring up just the same. So I don't know. Those are interesting questions to wrestle with, Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think why we don't see that as often with trusts is because the parties are fairly sophisticated, have sought extensive legal advice and CPA advice in that planning. They did it at a time before their testamentary capacity could be questioned, really, earlier in their lives, to do that wealth protection type piece, as opposed to last minute planning. I also think with the ease for which people can access what they think are wills online or print them up, or even the ability to do a holographic will, presents more opportunity for mischief due to the ease and the simplicity of a will. Don't print your will off online, underscore.
Yeah.
So that results in, I think, an increased level of mischief. Or printing off a trust is just less likely. It's just much more legally complex of a creature to manipulate. And then you have all of those fiduciary protections associated with the professionals wrapped around the creation of that trust.
Mm-hmm. I think that's right. Actually, number one reason why, Senator Nethercott, you co-sponsor the Uniform Power of Attorney Act, and everyone here voted for that, I believe. And that was it. You could print off a power of attorney online, and the instance of fraud and elder abuse was so rampant. Now we control it. You have to have a very specific type form, and that's trying to limit some of that. I don't know that you could be interesting. I don't know if you could take it to that level with a will, but Representative Lindholm, you've been patiently waiting.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When it comes down to the remote notarization and where the Corporations Committee is there, that bill and that amount of work was actually a pretty heavy lift. So we just decided to repeal all notary requirements. So it's just a lot easier now by not having to do that, like at all, ever.
Sounds like a Chairman Lindholm move.
Seems like the easier thing to do, right? A little less government. Everybody would appreciate that. But in all actuality, I mean, how this dovetails into it, I think that's probably going to be the best route, and probably the reality of how this looks anyways, just by essentially amending in those requirements. Once that piece of legislation is complete, we've already done the first glance at it, and the Corporations Committee chose to adopt the model language. I'm sure it won't look much like the standard language once we're done with it, but that's where we are in the process. Our next meeting on that piece of legislation will be September 10th and 11th, and that hopefully will not be remote.
Great. Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To Chairman Lindholm, I do have a question about how he's proceeding with that, and it's kind of the same concern I have here. If you're using model legislation, I'm assuming it's probably fairly antiquated model legislation and doesn't acknowledge or recognize a lot of the more modern terms of art, cryptography, secret keys, public keys, really all of the technologies that I think this group would encourage be used. Those words are not anywhere in the Model Act that we've got before us for wills, and I'm curious what your intent is over in Corporations Committee. Are you going to try and modernize and harmonize that Model Act with a lot of the other work we've been doing in blockchain and kind of with a better governance model for cryptographic security, or are you going to kind of go with the Model Act?
Chairman Lindholm.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I create model acts. I don't follow model acts. So if I get that opportunity, if I get the opportunity to amend something, I'm going to. And I think that is the intent. I can't speak for the whole corporations committee. Although Senator Nethercott is a member of that committee, I think that is definitely the intent. Also, there are a ton of concerns from industry about how the remote notarization was being handled during the whole COVID crisis. So I know that we're going to have a lot of amendments there to that model legislation to ensure it actually does what it's supposed to do. There was some hiccups along the way during the emergency orders for that. So that plus, adding in modern type language, put a little blockchain on it, never hurt nothing.
Quick follow-up, Mr. Chairman. Well, I think obviously there's some synergy between with these two bills, and we need to make sure that our definitions and the language that we're using in both bills are uniform between the two of us. If not with the uniform law, but at least we're doing what's appropriate so that we're not in conflict with our terms between your work and this work at a minimum.
So Senator Rothfuss, if I understand you correctly, what you're saying is that Chairman Lindholm needs to work a little faster, more efficiently for the good of the state of Wyoming, that if he could accomplish his bill quicker, then we could do our work over here.
Yeah, he needs to coordinate better among himself.
That'd be great. All right, Representative Yin, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think my concerns are what could go wrong. And so I think to get answers for that questions, I'd need to have conversations with an estate planning lawyer. So if there's a way we can get one of those to help testify at our next meeting, that would be great. I think overall, I worry about removing a notary requirement, mostly because otherwise, I think the opportunities for mischief, as Senator Nethercott has used the term, is high, in that just a couple of people could claim to be witnesses to help engender someone else. Yeah, I'd love to have conversations with an estate planning lawyer in the committee to answer some of these what could go wrong questions.
Yep, Representative Ian, I'm with you 100%. I don't lean towards removing that notary either. I think that's more of a just trying to work again with Chairman Lindholm. And just so you know, Representative Yin, we actually sent this out to the Wyoming State Bar's practice area on estate planning. So every estate planner who's signed up for that got notice of this. And so we were hoping to get some public comment in. Maybe we should have done, and we could do that going forward. I think you have a brilliant idea. Let's actually bring a couple of them in. That's not a bad idea. I actually sent this bill around to some of the top firms that deal in that and asked for comment. I know they're still getting back to me on comment. I think that it's just that the time we just moved so quickly that I haven't had those comments back yet, but some of those folks, it might not be a bad idea.
Mr. Chairman, I think we do have public comment. Kelly, do we not have some public comment on this today from folks that?
Yeah, Kelly, I see on my list, Mr. Meyer. Do you have more public comment?
We had more people sign up, but they're having problems getting into the meeting. So
it's our meeting. That's
Mr. Chairman, I do know, I saw come through my email, I'm a member of that estate planning section of the bar, that they did have prepared comments and had solicited that around. And I think through Mr. Meyer and a couple of other attorneys who evidently are prepared to speak today, those were there.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
That's right.
So Kelly,
Mr.
let's
Meyer,
make sure we can try and get some of these other people in. Meyer just left, unfortunately. No, we brought him
he's in. We just brought him in.
Perfect.
I just remembered Mr. Meyer is actually the president of that section. So it's very possible that he is going to relay a lot of that conversation for us.
yeah, Mr.
So-
Chairman, I did go ahead and resend that link out to the other people. So we'll see if they can make it in.
Great. Let's do that. And if there's no other general questions for David, I think what we'll do maybe is we can go into public comment, because it sounds like Mr. Meyer may help drive this conversation for us. All right. Scott, welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Scott Meyer here on behalf of Scott W. Meyer PC with offices in Cheyenne and Lander. And I do a lot of estate planning My only, I guess, initial comment, because of the complexity of the bill, and you've already just touched on that, is to make sure that we have either more people from the State Bars Trust and Estate Planning Group or WEPAC. I think that the notice went out to as many as you possibly could got, but I don't think a lot of them were either available or have had a chance to look at that. So I think you would get a lot of more, I get more fruitful comments from some of these folks if you gave them just an opportunity to, like, the next session or next meeting, and then talk about, see what you can get out of that. I will say, though, that dealing with whether it's the registered agent laws or the corporate statutes or the LLC statutes, when you start opening these up, you end up taking an awful lot of time as they go through and nitpick every little thing, which I think they should. And we do our own home cooking. By the time you get done with that, I'm not sure that this would be a bill that would be ready for January.
I'm sorry, Mr. Meyer. So it's July. This is the most aggressive, forward-thinking, hard-working committee in the state of Wyoming. I think you just may challenge the committee to have a primetime bill ready by January, and I jest to say that in jest, but I mean, we have half a year to work a bill. I think that all we have in front of us right now is a concept, and if the people of Wyoming want to digitize wills, that's really, I think, what the committee's interested in. How it looks and the vehicle for it is where apparently no states adopted this model bill, so maybe it's garbage. I know Senator Rothfuss can't stand it, but maybe that's what we need, is to spend 6 months really figuring it out. But if the topic's there, I think this committee's the one to do it.
Well, Mr. Chairman, if I may, I will tell you that I do believe that it's ripe for prime time. I think that it's something that needs to be looked at. There's been an awful lot of discussion on it, on this topic, probably for the last couple of years within various groups, whether it's Wyoming or Colorado, that I've been involved with. I think that people are looking forward to it. So if the committee can do that and move forward with it, I think that it would be a great thing for Wyoming.
Do you think, Mr. Meyer, is it even prudent to, or efficient rather, to even start with this model legislation? Or do you think it's a better idea to start from scratch, get some of your people from WEPAC, get some estate planners from the bar in here, and just start building a Wyoming Electronic Wills Act?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think that the Uniform Act is always a great place to start. But as you know, even with the Uniform Limited Liability Company Act that we got from the law commissioners, there's just an awful lot of home cooking in that stuff. And I think that that's probably appropriate. And given the fact that we are who we are, and we're not another state, we don't need to do it like Connecticut does or Alaska does. So I think that starting with that Uniform Act is great, but I don't think there's a problem with it comparing it with Nevada or anybody else that's already looked at this, and talk to those and figure out where the problems lie. And we can correct those issues as we're drafting now, as opposed to try to fix them later on.
And then, Mr. Meyer, because I know we were pressed with time as this went out, I'm not sure if you were able to field or receive any comments from from any of your groups on this specifically, or is there just maybe some interest and engagement? Do you have anything substantive there from your members?
Mr. Chairman, I haven't had anybody that has said, here are my critiques or here are my comments regarding the specific language of the act. But what I have received is a lot of interest from folks that just really think that this is someplace that we want to look at.
Okay. Well, and I'll see if the committee has any questions, but certainly one path going forward, committee, is if you decide on this topic, it might not be a bad idea to actually develop a working group with maybe Mr. Meyer or some others from his organizations mentioned, WEPAC, but also the estate planners. I think there's a lot of ways to really dive into this and move the ball pretty quickly, but maybe I'm optimistic. Senator Rothfuss.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Scott, there's a few questions I'd have that you can't necessarily answer today. If you can, that's great. But I'd like to hear answers. if there are problems with the Uniform Law Commission bill in terms of what we should be doing locally better, what are those problems and how can we improve it? Because as Chairman Olson mentioned, I'm not a big fan of the way the bill is structured either, but I'm curious to hear what those that practice in the field feel are the shortcomings. And then you've got at least 3 states that have passed legislation. You've got Nevada, Indiana, and Arizona that have each passed legislation. And then you've got several other bills that are in progress in various states of reality. And California is working on putting one through as well. Are there better models that we should be starting with? If not the Uniform Law Commission model, would any of these other states be preferable? And if so, why? What are the advantages? I don't know that we've delved deeply into them. So maybe this does get at kind of the working group concept, but it does seem to me this is an area where it's ironic, all of the things, at least to me, that you can do now that we've enabled over the last few years with regard to electronic contracts, digital signings, everything that we've put in place to really advance Wyoming in this field. And yet we still really are running on almost a common law level of how to deal with certain things legally, including wills. And there's a deep divide there. So if there's something we should be looking to better than the uniform law, I'd ask you to come back to us, and I'll certainly give you an opportunity to answer now if you have any ideas. But if you could come back to us and let us know what's the best of the best out there right now that we should be starting from.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, I will tell you that I think those are great questions, and I do think that we can reach out and get some folks to at least have some comments about them and have a chance to look at some of these other states. My experience has been when you start setting up these working groups is that you end up getting, 24 people that want to get onto this thing, and before it gets done, then you're probably down to about 4 or 5. But I think those will be the ones that really want to see what's happening. And I know some folks in Jackson and some folks in Sheridan that have some very strong comments about this stuff and would like to see it move forward.
Great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Representative Greer.
Yeah, so, Mr. Chairman, thank you. I've sat quiet on this for the last 15 years of my 20-year career. I made a majority of my living doing estate planning. And I've looked at this, and I do like this concept. There's got to be a little simpler way to do this. I think the concern that you see, Senator Rothfuss mentioned some states that have adopted this electronic will signing, but they're uniform probate code states. And that's one of the issues we run into in Wyoming is our probate code is a mess. And the legislature's tried to look at it for the last 50 years, and they always go running the other direction. And so I think as Mr. Meyer sits there without giving us a good solid answer, is that we need to think about this. We need to look at the nuances of what this does with our existing case law, our practice in the state, and make sure we don't have, what all us legislators fear are those unintended consequences. I look at it on its face, I agree. We still need to do something with those to be notarized. That when you look at a self-proving will and how that ties into our probate code, we really do need to look at that component of a little bit more, beef that up regarding identifying the witnesses. So there are some things I think we can look at, but it is going to take estate planners to look at this and weigh what they deal with within the law. And yeah, while you may sign a trust under contract law that is going to end up managing $20-30 million or some, $1 billion, the simple fact is that those pour over wills sometimes catch significant assets. And so that formality gets used maybe a little bit more than what we think. You have the issues regarding spousal rights, the marital share rights of children, issues regarding adopted children. All of those things need to be thought through. So it's not just as simple as saying, hey, we can sign a contract between sophisticated parties, by the way, online, but we can't do a simple will. So we just need to think about, I think it's the right direction. You bet.
Thank you, Representative Geary. I really appreciate that. And just in, some further to that conversation, I was speaking in Denver a year or so ago, and I actually brought up crypto wills, blockchain wills. There's a lot of excitement in the industry for that in general. And there's a few folks that really specialize across the country right now in estate planning and crypto in general, but there's a whole different world to write down your private key inside of a will versus actually hold everything you have written in code through this will on a blockchain. I think that's really where we want to end up. So that's when I started thinking about this Electronic Wills Act. The other little thing I just want to throw out for the committee is COVID, because this was the electronic will on the agenda for this committee predated COVID, but I think COVID really shook the world in terms of how we transact. And Chairman Lindholm's, his committee's running around trying to figure out how to do remote notaries when there's already plenty of states already doing that. We shouldn't be figuring that out now because there's a pandemic. We should have led on that a long time ago, and we didn't. And that's, I think that's one thing that this committee is a rock star in, is moving things forward, being very proactive, very progressive, and making sure that we're leading the country. It's unfortunate that we're so far behind, as Senator Rothfuss had said, moving us out of the 17th century into the 1990s. And I agree, there's a lot of complexity and a lot of things to really make sure we get this right. But I think this committee has the ability to take it beyond just having a digital will. I think this committee has the ability to really revolutionize estate planning in general in this country. As we move more and more into digital currencies, and as coins and dollars become less used in a world that we live in today because of this pandemic, the last thing we want to do is find ourselves in January with nothing. And, for all we know, maybe the world looks even worse than it does today, unfortunately, because of this pandemic and how we interact. So I think trying to think forward and get Wyoming ahead of the ball is really the goal and the aim, at least from my perspective. Senator Nethercott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would say that Wyoming is pretty far ahead in its estate planning types of practices that we have to offer. Teton County has taught us a lot, and some of those practitioners have been pretty forward thinking. And so as a message to anyone who would be watching, Wyoming is pretty visionary when it comes to that. And we are a place to protect your wealth and assets here already. But we are constantly looking for better ways to do that. Just as a piece of history, when I became Senate Judiciary Chairman, good Senator Rothfuss asked me what I hoped to do, what work I wanted to start on. I hope he remembers this. And I said, the probate code. And if you've ever seen a lead balloon, that's how well it went over. He was unimpressed. But now I can tell he is intrigued because he has heard from a good Representative Greer that our probate code is less than desirable.
Here's your chance.
Here's my chance. Probate code. Here I come.
Excellent. Committee, other questions, comments, certainly for Scott, or Scott, if you have anything you want to, please do, Scott.
I think that the only thing I would add is that there has been a lot of attempts, probably over the last, at least as far as I remember, 20 or 25 years of trying to attempt to move, at least some discussion, move away from our system into a uniform probate code. It seems that unfortunately people are kind of stuck in their ways and they don't like to have any of this change. And so I think as time has gone by, I think there is a more willingness to look at this. And when you have several attorneys like myself that practice also in Colorado, and you say, geez, I can do a whole lot more stuff a lot quicker in Colorado than I can here on some things, maybe not on everything, but I do think it does allow an opportunity to have that discussion. that being said, because of the fact that the Uniform Probate Code has been such a slow dragger, I don't want it to be something that would drag down this project.
Thanks, Scott. I really hope Senator Chairman Nethercott takes on the probate code as she is fully aware. The other, and Scott, you are too, and Mike, as a tail end of estate planning in your practice, you may not have dealt as much with it, but one thing that plagues Wyoming right now is e-filing and trying to get us into the 21st century there. And that's really a struggle. And some of it's financing, some of it's the state, and some of it is just what you said, Scott. Practitioners, I know a lot of my good friends who I love, but a lot of practitioners who are stuck in their ways, and they don't even want to send me an email. They still want to send me a pigeon carrier. And I get that to some level, but to better serve Wyoming and our clients, I think having greater access to things like that, where things can move quicker and more freely, is certainly good. So, all right, committee, anything else? No? Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, Senator.
And I think we still had an intent for additional public testimony, but I don't believe they've been able to join. So we might want to, if we get them in, maybe we put them to the final public testimony or something, give them opportunity to come in later. But I don't think we have any further public testimony at this point.
Okay, thank you, Senator. Yeah, I don't see anything over there either. I'd like to carry that forward. I'd really like to hear if there were so many different folks that were lined up to really get in and comment, and I would hate to cut them short. So, and even if we have to carry that over to another meeting, I think that's fine too. Sometimes, as proof now that the digital world maybe poses complexity as well in terms of inviting the public in. So,
yeah,
let's go ahead and unless there's any action to not take action, Senator Rothfuss.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I think we should continue with it, but I would just invite or want to hear from the committee to see if there's anything that they want out of direction on this. We've got the Uniform Law Code version drafted into Wyoming statute. I don't know who might want to shepherd this or what we want to do with it.
Yep, thanks. That's great. Representative Greer, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I was just looking for leadership. Where are we going to go with this? I agree we should continue to look at it, but what's your plan, Mr. Chairman?
Well, Mr. Chairman, Representative Greer, my recommendation for the committee would be that we move forward with the idea. I would like to, I've already basically put together an ad hoc working group. Like I said, I had sent this email out to some significant firms that deal in this, including in our Jackson area. I think that's the way to go. I'm not particularly married to the model legislation. I'm married to the idea of digitizing wills. So I would suggest that we get a working group together. I'd be happy to chair that. And anyone else on this committee who would like to be on it, there's plenty of lawyers. So I already know I'm going to handpick some of them. But I'd like to go out and get industry. I'd really like to get some lawyers out who are practicing and just start moving the ball on it. That's what I'd like to do. And then what you'd have is something similar to what you're going to have on the tail end of today. The tail end of today, you're going to have a bunch of working group reports. You still don't have to move forward on any of that stuff, but you at least have a lot more information from industry and our the work that we've done. And I think we could do the same thing and have it teed up for the next meeting.
Yeah, and Mr. Chairman, I think we need to see a little bit more about what other states have done as well as maybe one of the next steps. Let's better understand what alternatives are out there rather than just the Uniform Law Commission. We also need to work with Chairman Lindholm's committee, make sure that we're understanding how they're moving forward on their work. And the reality is, I think one of the challenges that we'll face as we're drafting is not to just follow this rather antiquated language, but to try and bring electronic wills forward and use a more modern approach as we're looking at it, while still respecting all of the important components that provide the verification and legitimacy of the will. So I think there's a lot of complexity here to get this right, and it doesn't seem like the Uniform Law Bill is really in that great a shape, in my view, to accomplish those things. So there's some work here. I think the working group concept you suggest is a good one.
Yeah. And I mean, there's a whole nother path to it too, which is we're so concerned about how we sign them, but I'm ultimately concerned with how they're held and where they exist, which is ultimately on a distributed ledger. I think maybe we could also reach out to, there's already some industry out there that's centering around this and trying to move the ball on having crypto wills. And it might not actually hurt to hear from one or two of them at our next meeting and get the idea of kind of what the long haul really looks like and what the grand vision is. And maybe we don't want that, but maybe that would help, I think, too. Senator Dockstader, were you raising your hand? No, you're just saying hi. Okay, hi. All right. I think we have some direction there. With that being said, let's go ahead and jump into Uniform Commercial Code. Mr. Land, thanks for joining us, as always.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, members. How are you?
Good to see you, Chris.
Good to see you.
All right, Mr. Land. So are you providing us with the update?
I think both Ms. Long and I jointly, I'd intended it to be a bit more of a discussion, more of a question and answer format, whether, we could provide you an update on some things that are going on, but mostly a discussion. Caitlin, are you on the line too?
Caitlin looks like she may have jumped.
She was here a moment ago. She might have stepped away for a second.
So she stepped away right when we're up. That's
perfect timing, exactly.
Yeah. Well, I'll launch in and hopefully she'll join again at some point.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah. So, all of the activities that the state of Wyoming is engaged with the SPDI and other digital asset activities is really the foundation of it all. Is kind of the providing legal certainty to fintech companies and financial institutions that are looking to get more involved in the emerging technology space. Uniform Commercial Code was first drafted in the 50s and has been updated several times since. It's a very useful and very flexible, if somewhat famously thick and hard to understand. But it's stood the test of time, and it's going to continue to serve a really important purpose in the future of commercial law in the U.S. That being said, it has a number of areas where it needs to be updated. For example, one of the reasons why you still have to take a picture of a check when you deposit it is because negotiable instruments can't be electronic yet; they have to be in tangible form. So there's things like that in the UCC that need to be updated. Both Caitlin and I have been, serving as observers to the Uniform Law Commission's Emerging Technology Study Committee. They've been doing good work since January and throughout the year. They're looking at virtual currency. They're looking at securities. They're looking at electronic negotiable instruments. And they've actually adopted a number of Wyoming's proposals in the broadest sense that were part of Senate File 125 last year. So Senate File 125, I can tell you that it has had an impact on the direction that the rest of the country's going. So it'll be interesting to see how that progresses. Like a lot of uniform acts, they take years to get through the whole Uniform Law Commission ALI process, and then they take several more years on a compressed schedule to get adopted by a critical mass of states. So we don't anticipate there being any action on virtual currency in kind of the next 5 years or so, or it might be at the end of the 5-year window. So Wyoming is going to continue to have a large role to play, providing legal certainty for digital asset transactions. One other piece I'll say before I'll turn it over to Ms. Long is we have kind of in our process of making sure that our digital asset laws are, 100% or as close to perfect as we can humanly make them. We have identified a couple more things that might be worth clarifying in our digital asset UCC appendix. I can go into more detail of that. It's really really niche stuff about proceeds from security interests. We just need to take a look at that to clarify how virtual currency and other digital assets would fit into the existing UCC. But otherwise, we're fairly happy of where we are on the digital asset appendix. With that, I'll, Mr. Chairman, with your indulgence, I'll give Ms. Long the floor.
Thank you, Ms. Long. Thanks for chiming back in at the perfect time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't actually have that much to add. I think Mr. Land covered most of what needed to be done. What I would say is there definitely were some, shall we say, sour grapes, folks who didn't want Wyoming to leap out ahead like we did. And actually there were the issues that they raised were really pretty minor and very edge case issues. And to Mr. Land's point, there are some refinements that it sounds like we should make to cover those edge cases. But what got enacted has stood the test of time very well, and other states are looking at it. One of the challenges is now that the Uniform Law Commission took up this topic, because they effectively acknowledged that the proposal that they originally had, which we looked at and did not adopt for obvious reasons, it was flawed. And now they have a broader study and they're looking at electronic instruments more broadly, and digital instruments, digital money issues more than just digital assets. They've essentially come around to where Wyoming ended up. And the reason is because that was directionally the right place. So I think you can expect that there will be a number of proposals coming out in terms of modifications to the Uniform Acts, and that we will probably be working on this very issue for the next couple of years, because there will be refinements that we will need to make where we decide we may want to conform with what they propose. But right now, it looks like we skated to where the puck was going to be, so to speak, and the rest of the country is delaying, waiting for the Uniform Law Commission to finish its work, and ultimately going to end up essentially where Wyoming is with pretty small differences, would be my guess at this point. But like Mr. Land said, it's going to take that process. They're in the study group period of their process, and then they go to the drafting group period, and then it all comes together. So, and then of course it gets released to the other states. It was really interesting along those lines for me to hear about the previous testifier on autonomous vehicles, talking about the difficulty that, the industry basically proposed its own Model Act and said they had a lot of problems with the Uniform Act. And part of that, I think, probably is that it just does take this long for the uniform process to work out. And sometimes you just can't wait for it. And so in effect, that's what's happening in the digital asset industry as well. So with that said, I'll close by saying that a number of states have reached out, including the governor of one of the largest states. His staff just reached out and asked what should they do. And my first recommendation to everybody is always to adopt the commercial law clarifications, because until those commercial law clarifications are enacted in your state, you really can't bring in the digital asset industry, because you're not adding anything to what exists right now. And what exists right now is that the only way that you have digital asset transactions legally enforceable under the Uniform Commercial Code is if they involve two intermediaries. And the vast majority of digital asset transactions involve either one intermediary or no intermediaries. And the law is just really unclear on that. And Wyoming really is the only state that has clarified that. So kudos to all of you. but this is going to stay on our plate probably every year for the next few years. Thank you.
Committee?
Mr. Chairman, I have a couple of quick questions.
Oh, yeah.
Unless there were others, I didn't see any other hands go up.
You moved on my screen. You were up at the top, so you threw me off when your hand went
Yeah.
up. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Land, it sounds like there are some tweaks, but nothing maybe substantial that we're going to need to change with regard to our asset custodianship and other statutory additions we've made in the past few years. Is that accurate? You don't see anything on the horizon with regard to our previous work that is going to be a significant lift for changes?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Land.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Rothfuss, yeah, I don't think we need to touch the custody piece, 3429.4. I don't think we need to touch it at all. The minor changes need to be made to 103, which is the security interest section. The custody piece is like solid. So solid, in fact, that Wyoming was cited in the OCC's letter last week authorizing national banks to do digital asset custody activities. And I fully expect that in the next couple of months that when the OCC is looking at this issue harder, where they permit national banks to do that activity, that Wyoming is going to continue to have influence in this area. But long story short, Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, yeah, it would be a very small bill is what my hopes are.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I just asked Mr. Land to work with our staff and start putting that together as they come up, as the tweaks come up, as sort of that minor amendment bill that I anticipate will want to be running for the upcoming session. So please don't hesitate to get with us on that. Mr. Chairman, one follow-up, and this was something I was going to ask Ms. Long also, is over the past couple of weeks, there have been some significant actions taken by other states and taken by the feds. And this is the best spot on our agenda to talk through a couple of those things. I don't know that everyone on the committee is familiar with what took place with the OCC and some of the other recent developments. So before lunch, we've got a few minutes. We've got 15 more minutes. And that was what I was kind of hoping to hear a little bit about ahead of lunch, is some of the new developments. So Mr. Land, would you start with providing the committee a little bit of detail about what occurred with the OCC, and then if you have any other new developments to present, that would be great.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members. Senator Rothfuss, thank you for the question. What happened last week was a bit of an earthquake. That's the way I described it to some of the federal regulators. Wyoming's approach to this asset class has been proven 100% right. That's not an exaggeration. What happened was last week, the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, which charters and supervises national banks in the U.S., large national banks like Wells Fargo and J.P. Morgan, et cetera, they issued an interpretive letter saying that it was permissible to do digital asset custody for national banks. It's not really a policy change because they had the power to do so before. It was just kind of a clarifying, saying that we're not going to, we view this as consistent with existing law on asset custody. But it does mean that at some point in the not too distant future, national banks are going to start engaging in digital asset custody activities. Whether they will, and by digital asset custody, I mean activities similar to the SPDI. Whether banks do so or not is kind of more of a function of their risk appetite and receptiveness to innovation, but they will have the legal authority to do so, likely when certain secondary issues like the FDIC coordinating with the OCC and doing some policy development in-house takes place. Technically, they could probably do it today if they wanted to, but I think realistically, Wyoming, I think we probably have a few months before a national bank will start doing this on a scaled level. But it is important to note that this is one of those issues. This is one of the core value propositions for the SPDI and why it was enacted. So I'm very mindful that Wyoming has a closing window at the moment, and we are acting under the expectation that there are going to be at least a couple of national banks involved in this space in 2021. And I'll let Ms. Long follow up with your indulgence, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Long.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I would have one thing to add to Mr. Land's comment about the national banks, which is that, and by the way, there are 3 of those in Wyoming, but the state member banks by law can do everything that the national banks can do too.
Even
And
state
so,
member banks. Yeah.
yes, and so what that effectively means is that every bank in the country now has the ability to do this. And what's interesting about how it's all playing out is, to Mr. Land's point, the safety and soundness concerns for a gigantic bank adding a new business like this are going to be minimal, and so they're going to be allowed to enter this market immediately, whereas the smaller non-mega banks, non-money center banks would have to go through presumably a lengthier review, as would any other Wyoming existing bank that decides to get into this business. And there have been a few who have contacted me. And again, just for full disclosure, I am the CEO of Avanti, which is applying to become one of the Wyoming Speedy Banks. And so I'm deeply in the middle of eating our own dog food, so to speak, of living the custody and UCC arrangements that Wyoming enacted 2 years ago. So yes, I mean, they're really coming for us, but we do have a lead. And I've been so grateful that with the commitment of the Wyoming legislature, as well as the Wyoming Division of Banking, to keeping that lead and ensuring that what happened to South Dakota when they sought the lead in the credit card industry and Delaware quickly followed and snatched it away from them, that doesn't happen here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, one additional comment, if you'll permit me.
Please.
I don't know that any bank in the country could do this right now, mainly because I don't think the FDIC is in a position to be able to fully sign off on this yet. So while the legal authority may in theory exist, I'm not really quite sure pragmatically, realistically, that any bank in the country could do it right now. But most banks in the country will be able to do it in the short to medium term, though. But today, I don't know if that's completely accurate.
Mr. Chairman, I have a quick follow-up on this line of discussion about the OCC, and that gets to the legal clarity of digital asset custodianship in other states and at the federal level. We were just talking about that. The importance of what we've done with the UCC with regard to providing that clarity, and the fact that in other states and other jurisdictions they may not have that. So let's say we did have FDIC solution and OCC has now provided this permissive letter. How does a bank though look at the property right concepts associated with digital asset custodianship if they're in a different state and under a different jurisdiction? What does it mean to them?
Mr. Chairman, 2 responses really quickly. My first response is the FDIC raised that very question to me last week. They don't believe the OCC has worked out all the details yet, and that's one of the things that they don't think is fully fleshed out yet. The second piece is they would likely be able to use Article 8 under the existing UCC, as long as it was on an intermediated basis, as long as there was, 2 intermediary parties involved, or at least 1 intermediary. Caitlin, Ms. Long, what are your thoughts?
Ms. Long?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I would agree with that. Again, only about 20 to 25% of digital assets are held by intermediaries. It's a very small minority. And so that small minority of transactions, Mr. Chairman, is legally enforceable in other states because they can use UCC Article 8, but the vast majority are not. And what's fascinating also is there hasn't been much litigation in digital assets yet.
Nope.
I know we talked a lot about the importance of having the Chancery Court. I do believe that there will be litigation in digital assets. I mean, literally Bitcoin it just is up 8% today. It's crossed 10,000 again. It is, as more money is involved and more professional investors and institutions and high net worth individuals get involved, I think you will start seeing more litigation, but it hasn't happened yet. And so what's happening is that in the terms and conditions, what the companies will typically say is a warning that we don't know if the transactions involving these assets are legally enforceable.
And we disclaim liability. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And obviously Wyoming wasn't interested in leaving those risks open. And so we fixed the UCC and by creating that addendum to map digital assets to the existing UCC, we don't have a non-standard UCC, to be clear. But had we not done that, then we wouldn't have been able to offer the legal certainty. Mr. Chairman, if I could just add also one more thing. Last week, on the same day, who knows if it's a coincidence or not, but on the same day as the OCC announcement came out, Visa posted a blog about its digital asset strategy and endorsed not only Bitcoin, but also stable coins, which is also something that the banking industry is very interested in, because essentially it's just a different way to settle payments outside of existing payment systems like ACH or a FedWire. And that was, again, an earth-shattering announcement as well. So you've now seen major players in financial services coming for this industry. And frankly, I think the biggest impact of all this is it takes off the table the whole narrative that I know you all hear, because I hear it too. Isn't the government just going to ban this? It's not. That wasn't even possible. Even if they wanted to, it hasn't been possible for probably 5 years for a government to effectively ban Bitcoin. But now that all the national banks and state member banks can get involved, plus Visa has put its cards on the table, it's just a non-issue. Thank you.
Great. Perfect. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I just say thank you so much for that. That was a great update. I mean, I follow it all on social media, but obviously not everyone here does. So I think that's really helpful, Caitlin and Chris, to help everyone understand what's moving around us right now, because it's pretty big right now.
Yeah, it is. Yep.
Anything else, Chris or Caitlin? All right. Committee, anything else on this topic? Or for Caitlin or Chris? Because if not, we're 5 minutes ahead of schedule. So we're rocking, and that being the case, I don't think, let's double check public comment on this, because I know Mr. Meyer listed several topics, and he did list UCC. So let's, but I don't see him in the waiting room.
And we can get him at the end of the day also. I think he'll be providing general public comment. I don't see him in the waiting room either. So
yeah, this was for the Bankers Association.
Yep.
So we can capture him later. That's fair. So with that being said, let's break for, Senator Dockstader, were you getting ready to, yeah, go ahead.
To my co-chairs, I'm working out of our county courthouse right now, and I have a working luncheon with my commissioners and others, so I'll be a little delayed in getting back. Just want my co-chairs to know that. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Dan.
Appreciate that. Actually, Mr. Meyer just came back in the waiting room. Maybe we'll use our 4 minutes wisely right here. Let's see if we can take his UCC comments. Scott, you have some comments, I think, on behalf of maybe the Banking Association on the UCC. We'd love to hear from you.
At this time, no comment. I think that everything has been said that we've been talking about in the past. And right now, I think that the comment that I think strikes probably closer to home is, while the OCC has done some stuff, they are not the FDIC, and that'll be a different sell.
Fantastic. Okay, well, thanks for chiming back in and still saving us some time. All right, so we'll break for lunch, committee. We'll be back at 1 p.m. and we'll continue chugging along from there into KYC, AML, portability, and that working group update. So
excellent. Everyone remember to mute both your sound and your video, please. See you at 1.